Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. Yes, they're all from the Bloody Horns. The Bloody Horns? Are they one of the mercenary corps on this mission? Lin Li asked as he recalled how Hank had told him of the 6 mercenary corps that were on the mission to visit the Fire Plume Ridge. One of them was called Bloody Horns. Yes. Aragon hesitated. Honestly, he should be supporting Lin Li. Since he'd saved him in Black Hills Town, it was only natural to express gratitude to him over and over again. Furthermore, apart from meeting their leader a few times, his relationship with the Bloody Horns was not close. The problem was, this matter concerned the cooperation between the 6 mercenary corps. It was alright to get rid of a few fellas here and there, but if the matter were to leak out, and people knew that it was Silverhand's guests who took their lives, the relationship between the 2 mercenary corps would be affected. Previously, it would not have any implications, for with the Silverhand's ability, they would not need to be threatened by the Bloody Horns. However, it was not the case now. If they were to kill him, the Silverhand's situation would be very awkward. Although the 6 mercenary corps agreed to embark on this mission together, they did not have any commendable relationship with each other at all. Under the temptation of benefits, their problem of self-interest was more prominent than before. "All right," replied Lin Li. How would he not understand the importance? Lin Li nodded at Aragon, and shouted to Sean in the distance, "Sean, don't be too harsh." "All right, Mr. Fellick." Sean was indeed a monster. While he was striking and slashing with his great sword, he could still find time to reply to Lin Li, "Let me help Captain Serena, thank you." Aragon could finally feel relieved. Everything would be good as long as no lives were taken. As for how harshly Sean dealt with the man, Aragon would not be able to interfere with it. In reality, even if Sean did not wish to kill, Aragon had the intention to teach Sandro a lesson the hard way. How could that fella dare to offend the noble guests of the Silverhand? Did they think that the Silverhand was afraid of them? While Aragon was thinking of how to explain it to the leader of Bloody Horns, he shifted his gaze from Sandro to the ore on the ground. Then, he froze. That pile of ore seemed extremely ordinary. There was nothing special about it apart from the dark red elements. Any normal person would have thought them to be the usual rocks out there. Aragon, however, was different. His father was an old miner who had mined for decades. Furthermore, before he joined the Silverhand, he had experience mining too. It was all the same for low-level adventurers. Apart from hunting magical beasts, they would take up part-time jobs. Sean, who used to harvest herbs to earn enough money to upgrade his equipment, was a good example. Yet Aragon was not in the mining industry long enough, as he got hired by the Silverhand, after half a year. With his little knowledge on minerals, he could not tell what type of ore it was. But there was one thing Aragon was certain about: the ore strewn over the ground was definitely a type of magical metal. Oh my God, Aragon's face turned pale. His gaze towards Lin Li was filled with bewilderment. People who could harvest magical metals were rare. They not only needed to be learned regarding minerals, but also be proficient in their knowledge of magic. Magical metals were immensely fragile. It would only take a trivial mistake to damage the entire mineral vein. Hence, only people who already reached the higher tier of mastery would have such a skill. Aragon had never expected that man who appeared to be a level 5 warrior would be an expert miner. "Mr. Fellick, did you harvest this ore?" Aragon inquired, feeling that his throat became a little dry. Lin Li smiled. He knew what Aragon wanted to know, but there was no need to hide such matters. He nodded honestly, and said, "Yes." Aragon was completely stunned. He glanced at Lin Li, then at Sean, and planned to inform Captain Serena of it when he returned. He was a rare expert miner, after all. At the same time, the battle ended on the other side. Sean knocked Sandro's weapon away out of his grip in a single strike, pointing his double-edged sword at Sandro's neck. He did so because Lin Li reminded him not to be too harsh on that enemy, or else a little more strength was all he needed to cut off Sandro's head. Aragon, I'm handing this man to you, said Lin Li with a smile. He also pointed to the two unconscious archers on the ground. You should bring those two fellas away too. Thank you, Mr. Fellick. The series of surprises made Aragon more cautious of Lin Li, and much respectful as well. After thanking him politely, he ordered his men, tie them up and send them back to our camp first. Then, request for the leader of the Bloody Horns to come personally for them. Yes. A few archers took out ropes from their backpack, and started to tie the three men up. Mr. Fellick, I'll be returning to the camp now. I swear that these fellas would be heavily dealt with. Seeing that everything was ready, Aragon bid goodbye to Lin Li. Goodbye. As for these people, a little punishment will do since I wasn't really affected by them. Goodbye. Although Sandro was a level 10 warrior, he was tied up like a rice dumpling. No matter how he struggled, he could not break free from the ropes, which were the thickness of a thumb. While they walked, Aragon became gloomier and gloomier as he thought of what had just happened. He slapped Sandro's head, and scolded, "You're really tired of life, eh? How could you offend the guests of the Silver Hand? I'm going to make your captain punish you further when you get back." Lin Li could not help but laugh at them from the distance. He did not intend to do anything to these people. Now that they fell into the hands of Aragon, they were going to suffer. After seeing the group of men leave, Lin Li lit another air bomb scroll to open the mineral vein of the abyss fiendish iron completely. Then, he opened the ring of endless storm to keep all the ore. Following that, he brought Sean towards the cave their map mentioned. Aragon, on the other hand, reached the camp of the Silver Hand very quickly. When he reached the camp, he handed the three captives to the guards, while he himself dashed to the tent of his captain. After entering, Aragon saw Hank speaking to the captain. If it were before, Aragon would wait until Hank finished talking. But, this time, he did not want to waste any time. As soon as he stepped into the tent, he interrupted Hank. "Captain Serena, are you free? You have something to tell me?" "Yes, Captain Serena. I must tell you something." Serena frowned at Aragon's impatience. She knew this man very well. He had always been calm and reserved. When they got into danger in Black Hills town, Aragon could remain composed and enter the inn. What could have happened that made him so anxious? "You found someone you like?" Aragon was beyond speechless. He really could not understand what was in the mind of his pretty captain. She had always been meticulous and astute in the management of work-related affairs. At times, however, she would say unusual things, such as asking if Thuzaden had his dinner. Aragon drew a few breaths, and then raised his volume, saying, "Captain Serena, it's regarding the two of our guests." Once she heard that it concerned her two guests, her expression turned serious. Something happened to them? They had a fight with the people from the Bloody Horns. People from the Bloody Horns? Humph, how dare Brooke touch my distinguished guests? Hank, go ask a few men and bring Brooke before me. Hank was a little hesitant. Although Serena was oblivious the true identity of the two guests, how would Hank be unaware? It would be the problem of the Bloody Horns to offend them. How would they need the help from the Silver Hand? "Captain Serena, it's not that. Listen to me." Aragon drew a few more breaths before recounting what happened on the Fire Plume Ridge. "You mean that Mr. Sean defeated Sandro?" Serena asked in shock. She knew that Sandro was the backbone of the Bloody Horns. Without the Griffin, she'd have to use a lot strength to defeat him. But now, he had been defeated by a warrior she had not even heard of. "There's another thing," Aragon hesitated, and continued with much uncertainty, "Captain Serena, I suspect that Mr. Fellick might be an expert miner." "You must be kidding!" Serena exclaimed in astonishment. There were thousands of people under the Silver Hand Mercenary Corps. Among them, at least 1/3 had the knowledge of minerals. However, not a single one could reach the expert level. Oh, yes. Just that afternoon, Mr. Fellick told her that he wanted to go search for ores and herbs. However, it should not be that crazy, right? Expert miners were highly sought after by huge and influential corporations. Even Serena knew of a powerful figure who had been wanting to collect rare ores, but to no avail. Aragon, are you sure? I'm not very certain about it. Aragon hesitated before reaching into his pocket for a piece of dark red ore that was the size of a thumb. I took this back, secretly. When I rushed there, Mr. Fellick had heaps of ore like this with him. Captain Serena, why don't you find someone to verify the identity of this ore? Sure, I shall do that. Hank was the calmest person among the three people in the tent. He had cultivated a huge mental and emotional capacity from meeting countless freakish people like Lin Li. After several encounters like that, he gradually became numb. As long as it was something that he experienced, even if it was an unusual matter, it would never be incomprehensible. When Serena was about to leave the tent, she suddenly thought of something. Turning back, she asked Aragon to come over. Aragon, help me with something. What is it? Go and ask those people from the Bloody Horns about what happened on the Fire Plume Ridge. Use whatever methods necessary to get them to reveal everything. If they successfully hide anything, you know the consequences. Aragon's face darkened. Isn't she hinting me to extort a confession from them using tortures? However, that was exactly what he wanted. He had something against Sandro. And you, Hank. After giving Aragon instructions, Serena called Hank over. You stay in the camp. If people from the Bloody Horns were to come, keep them here until I return. Yes, Captain Serena. A few lines were all it took for Serena to finish giving her orders. Then, she left the camp with that piece of ore. It was dusk when Hank saw Serena again after an hour. The first thing she did was to call for Aragon. Aragon, did you manage to find out anything? Yes, Captain Serena. They told me everything. Continue, Serena said as she nodded her head. It was actually a coincidence. Aragon started to tell her what he'd learned in that hour. It was like what he started off with. The entire matter was a coincidence. If the people from the Bloody Horns had not told him, even Lin Li, who was on the Fire Plume Ridge, would also not have thought of how coincidental the timing of the matter was. From the start, Sandro and his team were ordered to go to the Fire Plume Ridge as their first mission. However, when they passed by that forest, they accidentally discovered the mineral veins of the abyss fiendish iron. This Sandro was a miner in the past, Aragon added. Of course, Sandro was not knowledgeable enough to decipher what type of mineral vein it was. But the coincidence was that he had heard that there was a magical metal with a mineral vein that would turn the ore and the surrounding soil dark red in color. As an adventurer, the idea of a mineral vein of any magic metal was naturally a big temptation for Sandro because it meant huge fortune he could gain from it. With all that wealth, he would be able to retire from being an adventurer and live a luxurious life peacefully. On top of that, Lin Li and Sean seemed so frail and weak previously. Actually, it was rather unfair for that dude. During the interrogation, he was so indignant when he complained to me. What he thought to be pushovers turned into two powerful opponents. It was as though he kicked iron plates instead of soft persimmons. The mention of Sandro's realization made Aragon feel like laughing. Hank rolled his eyes beside him. What was there to be surprised about? Sandro was not the only hapless man he knew of that kicked these iron plates. Not to mention the group of robbers from Black Hills town that was killed by Sean, there was Thuzaden with the lousiest luck, who thought that he could send everyone in the inn to their deaths, but got shot dead by Mr. Fellick. He probably still was not able to figure out why a crossbow could suddenly appear from the crowd. Of course, Hank would not dare to tell them these. It was nothing for him to be reprimanded by Serena for keeping such secrets. The real trouble would start if he were to offend that man. If he knew that it was him who divulged the matter, how would Hank be able to escape the fate of being skewered by his icicle? Therefore, Hank only listened to their conversation at the side silently. Before I forget, Aragon said as something came to his mind. He said hesitantly, there's a thing I feel we should take note of. What is it? Sandro said when Mr. Fellick fought with his two teammates, instead of fighting them personally, he detonated some kind of firearm. Detonation? Serena froze in surprise, and said, you meant. Explosive mining? I'm suspecting that. The expression of Aragon showed amazement too. Many people knew the existence of a skill like explosive mining, but few dared to use it. The reason was very simple: explosive mining was too difficult to master. It would only take a small mistake to destroy both the mine and lives. Even an expert miner would not want to risk attempting such a dangerous skill. At that moment, the two people could not help but be in a daze. Although they had been suspecting Mr. Fellick to be an expert miner right from the start, when they related him to explosive mining, they were awestruck. That was really a crazy thing. In the whole of Felon Kingdom, the number of people who knew how to use explosive mining to mine would not exceed 100. Among them, at least 90 had been drawn over by large organizations. The Marathon family, which rose to its status back then due to their business in forging, was one such organization. It successfully gathered more than half of these people under its name. Hence, there would be fewer than 10 expert miners who weren't affiliated with any organization. People with such a talent were highly sought-after ones. Explosive mining could increase the efficiency of any mining activity by 1-fold. The Dwarf Kingdom, which was located at the north of the Sunset Mountains, only had a few hundreds of thousands people. However, it was able to form a country by itself in the chaotic world of Amrel. That was thanks to their forte, which was forging, as well as mastery of mining techniques. Among the different mining techniques, they were especially known for their explosive mining. It was just because the Dwarf Kingdom had a goblin working for them. Goblins had a flair in creating weapons. Their knowledge in explosive techniques peaked among the entire Amrel. The weapons they produced were so powerful that they could be compared to the spells of magic shooters. It was said that during the Dark Age, the goblins created a type of weapon that could easily penetrate the shields of archmages, with fire from their metal tubes. Unfortunately, that skill set vanished after the era. Hence, the goblins could only seek refuge in the Dwarf Kingdom. On top of the innate talent of the dwarfs in forging and mining, the explosive mining technique from the goblins made the Dwarf Kingdom a stronger entity. Although the population of the kingdom was rather small, they got to be protected in the world of Amrel, and also reaped benefits from all the wars that happened. Gradually, they had grown to have the shadow of the descendants of the Titans. Hence, it was obvious how an expert miner who had the knowledge of the explosive mining technique would be so high in demand. Deep in thought, Serena nodded her head as she commented, "Seems that we are really not wrong. I'm afraid this Mr. Fellick might really be an expert miner." Then, she reached into her pocket for the abyss fiendish iron and fiddled with it in her hands. "Oh, right. Captain Serena, have you identified this ore?" "Yes. This ore is called the abyss fiendish iron. If it were to be added into a weapon, it would increase the weight of the weapon by multiple times. That old Alakir said that it is considered one of the rarest ores." "Even Mr. Alakir came?" Aragon froze when he heard the name. Alakir was the leader of Adventurers Guild, the person in charge of all the adventurers in the entire Felon Kingdom. Apart from Aldwin, the leader of the Guild of Magic, no one would be comparable to him for his level 21 abilities. As an adventurer himself, how would Aragon not hear of Alakir? In reality, Alakir's story was the inspiration for most people to take up this occupation in Felon Kingdom. For almost all adventurers, Alakir had only been a legendary character that they'd heard of. However, now that this legendary man was so close to them, even Aragon could not help but show signs of excitement. "But he is extremely lively too," Serena muttered as she minced her lips. Then, she said in a serious tone, "That old man also said that he hopes to meet that fella if given the chance. So Aragon, we need to grab onto this opportunity." "Understood," replied Aragon as he nodded. Serena's words were more than clear. It was not easy to meet any expert miner, especially one who knew about the explosive mining and who was not bound to any organization. How would anyone reject a partnership with him? When Alakir expressed his hopes about wanting to meet Lin Li, his motive was clear. To be honest, the Silver Hand had zero edge over the huge Adventurers Guild. Whether it was in terms of finances, resources, manpower, military might, intelligence, or emotional capacity, To want to win heart of the miner who had the explosive mining skills would be like a dream. The only advantage the Silver Hand had was only the fact that they'd met Mr. Fellick before the Adventurers Guild did. And that was also their only chance. If they could rope Mr. Fellick into the Silver Hand before the Adventurers Guild, Alakir would not be able to snatch him away. Captain Serena, what should I do? Very easy. You just need to give in to whatever request Mr. Fellick makes starting from today. Remember, don't question him. Noted, Captain Serena. At the same time, Lin Li was still venturing into the cave. He was completely unaware that he had already shocked both a captain and a guild president by his casual act of bombing the mineral vein. He'd had no choice either. Who asked him to have met mostly mages, and not miners in the few months since he'd entered the world of Amrel? And how would he have known that explosive mining, an ancient and unsophisticated skill, would have such a high standing here? Furthermore, even if he knew, explosive mining was the technique that was the simplest and most straightforward to him. Why should he restrict himself from using such a technique just because he needed to take care of the feelings of one captain and one guild president? It did not make sense for him to adopt the most primitive method of using a metal shovel to dig for ore. If he were to know the truth, he would probably holler, "I'm a very busy man, and I have no time to care about your feelings." That was right, he was indeed busy. Ever since he'd entered the cave, he had been very busy cursing. He had been cursing the people who'd created the map. God damn it, this is outrageous. Lin Li's rage grew as he thought about it. Wasn't the cave as complicated as a spider's web? How can one simple green line on the map tell me how to navigate? Lin Li had felt a sense of foreboding the moment he stepped into the cave. The wide network of pathways inside the cave was like a spider's web. Just looking at all the pathways made Lin Li feel very dizzy. How could he even identify directions? After bringing Sean to walk around for many rounds, Lin Li could not even remember where he came from. This made him really feel like crying. Damn it. He had already wasted a few hours inside of the cave. If that were to continue, it would be midnight if he was able to walk out of the cave. They were at the Fire Plume Ridge, where all powerful magical beasts roamed freely. One already had to be extremely careful of them in broad daylight, not to mention in the night. If Lin Li were to meet beasts that they could not defeat, or miss a step and fall into a ravine like Sean, wouldn't there be big trouble? I will think of a way, Lin Li vowed angrily through his clenched teeth as they moved around the cave. They should not be getting themselves lost again. Mr. Fellick, after following Lin Li another round of the same place, Sean could not contain himself further. He reminded meekly, "I think we passed by here before." Lin Li really felt like killing himself after hearing those words. He had been a hunter famous for his bad sense of direction in the endless world. If not for his wealth that allowed him to purchase the guide light from the unscrupulous merchant, he would have died. How would he have the opportunity to acquire the Stars of Fury to kill the Dragon of Destruction? Although he was in Amrel, his sense of direction was still as poor as before. Without the guide light with him, how was he going to walk out of that horrible cave? Mr. Fellick, just when Lin Li was filled with frustration, Sean called out to him. What is it again? Lin Li was still thinking of crashing into the wall. When he heard Sean's voice, he immediately thought that something more terrible happened. While replying, his expression was uglier than crying. I think there's someone. Huh? Lin Li exclaimed, and instantly became more alert. There's someone? Yes, and he's walking towards us. Then, Lin Li heard footsteps too. He immediately let out Warlock's eyes. Indeed, Lin Li gasped. After all, he was a level 13 magical shooter. Hence, he was much clearer than Sean in terms of making out the movements in his surroundings. Through the Warlock's eyes, Lin Li could clearly see there was really a figure walking towards them. That person looked around 30 years old. He had a brand new armor, and carried 2 axes on his back. In the dark and eerie cave, the weapons emitted a dull blue. Lin Li only needed one glimpse to know they were quality magical weapons. From the delicate craftsmanship, Lin Li could tell that the creator had master-level qualifications. This man had a distinct appearance, too. He would not lose out to Sean in terms of his big and tall build. Due to his age, he even looked bolder than Sean. His messy golden hair and big beard that resembled steel needles on top of his hearty expression gave people an impression of a dignified and dauntless man. Lin Li could not help but feel a little worried. That man was too powerful. He was at least a level 15. People at level 15 were no joke. During the few months Lin Li came to Amril, apart from the few old monsters like Macklin and Anduin, he rarely met people above level 15. To someone like that warrior, 30 was a golden age. With such a long time to train his combat skills, he definitely had the opportunity to go beyond the legendary level. Furthermore, with his 2 magical weapons, even Jiren might not be his match. Frankly speaking, Lin Li was still very hesitant about whether he should ask the stranger for help. His ability was too strong, it threatened Lin Li. Who knew that the man noticed their presence when he was still hesitating? Who's there? Stop hiding. The 6 senses of the warrior of at least level 15 were too sharp. It only took Lin Li to draw a gentle breath to expose their hiding spot. Good evening, Mr. Warrior. Don't worry, we don't have evil intentions. Since their whereabouts had been discovered, there was no point hiding anymore. If the man were to think that they had ulterior motives and attack, they would not be his match. Hence, why shouldn't he make it clear first? Lin Li came out of the darkness without hesitation with a smile on his face, and his arms were spread wide to show that he did not have any weapons. Good evening, you too. The warrior nodded, maintaining a courteous attitude. After shifting his gaze from Lin Li to Sean, he became a little shocked. He knew Sean was a warrior, but was naturally surprised with his ability. Let me introduce myself. I'm Felix, from the Silverhand Mercenary Corps. This is my buddy, Sean. How should I address you? You are from Silverhand? The warrior had a startled look on his angular face. After sizing Lin Li up for a while, his attention stopped at the map in his hands. Then, his wariness transformed into astonishment instantly. He reached out a rough right hand and held Lin Li's hand passionately. I'm Andre, nice to meet you both. You recognize this map? Lin Li was sharp to notice the reason for the change in the warrior's attitude. That's right, I have one with me too. Andre nodded, and reached into his pocket for a similar map. Then, he praised profusely, I could navigate this area so efficiently these 2 days, thanks to Silverhand's map. Hee. Lin Li lifted the corner of his mouth, and laughed awkwardly. Maybe it was the problem with appearance. While Lin Li and Sean got themselves trapped in the cave, the same map allowed Andre to avoid so many unnecessary pathways. If not for his looks, what could be the reason? Oh, yes. Brother Felix, isn't Silverhand at the base of the mountains? Why are you here? Andre asked in a concerned tone while patting Lin Li's shoulder. Since he knew their identity already, he did away with the formalities. Captain Serena gave us a mission. Have you completed the mission? If not, I could give you some help. Speaking of Serena, it has been long since I've met that girl. We've completed the mission, Lin Li scratched his head awkwardly, but we lost our way. Andre almost coughed out a mouthful of saliva. He would never have thought that someone could be so hilarious, getting lost with a map in his hands. If you want to laugh, go ahead. It's not the first time, anyway. No, Brother Felix, you have misunderstood. I did not want to laugh at you, but you are really. Andre took a lot of effort to contain his laughter. Lin Li rolled his eyes. He knew what Andre was thinking. It's all right, Brother Felix. You can follow me. I'm sure you'll reach home by dinner time, Andre replied as he patted his chest as though trying to make up for his lack of composure. Then I shall thank you, Brother Andre. You're welcome. Andre was not blabbering. His sense of direction was much better than Lin Li's. He brought the 2 men around the cave, and after a few turns, they saw a light shining from afar. Phew, after seeing that spot of light, Lin Li heaved a sigh of relief. They were finally out of that terrible cave. After leaving the cave, Lin Li's mood got a lot better. Hence, He also had the mood to chat with Andre throughout the journey. The topic of the conversation shifted to the two weapons Andre had with him. Haha. You have great interests, brother Felix. These two double-handed axes are named Flash and Darkness Decimator, both created by yours truly. When I made them, my mentor was so proud of me. Brother Andre has such a delicate craftsmanship. Lin Li wasn't trying to be polite. He genuinely felt that those two axes were rare quality goods in terms of forging method and magical treatment. To him, Andre's skill in forging was close to the master level. They chatted from the Fire Plume Ridge to the campsite, and Lin Li got to see the interesting side of him. Being at least level 15, Andre was considered one of the best in Felon Kingdom. However, when interacting with Lin Li, he was not arrogant at all. Even though he thought that Lin Li was a low-level warrior, he'd still pat his shoulder while addressing him as Brother Felix. That was no hypocrisy. Lin Li could tell that Andre was treating them sincerely, and not like someone he could make use of. He reminded Lin Li of how Mason patted his shoulder and said, "Don't worry, Felix. As long as you are with me, I'll ensure you excel in the trial," when he'd reached Alana for the first time. Sometimes, social interaction could just be so simple. Brother Felix, there's something I'm not sure if I should say, Andre spoke hesitantly when they reached the base of the Fire Plume Ridge. Brother Andre, speak your mind. You are not the type to hesitate. If you want to earn money, there are many other effortless but high-paying missions I can refer to you after I get back to Alana. So, you might want to withdraw from the Fire Plume Ridge mission, because I'm scared you'd. To ensure he would not embarrass Lin Li, Andre was subtle in his words. Yet, the underlying intention was clear. A level 5 warrior like Lin Li would be seeking death if he stayed at Fire Plume Ridge. If you are scared that little Serena wouldn't allow it, I can help you convince her. Due to my relationship with her father, she even needs to address me as Uncle Andre when she sees me. Lin Li rolled his eyes. What crap is he blabbering about? Then shouldn't Serena address me as uncle too? Do I have to bring her to look at goldfish then? Of course, Lin Li knew Andre had good intentions. He smiled at Andre gratefully, but said nothing. Andre was not a fool. He knew his warning was futile when he looked at Lin Li's expression. Andre sighed, and changed the topic to forging. He would never have thought that this conversation would be such a great help to him. Although it was Andre doing most of the talking, Lin Li gave some critical suggestions too. When Lin Li asked why not do that, Andre would pause and sink into deep thoughts for a very long time. Throughout the journey, Andre could not help but admire Lin Li's innovative ideas, and he was much younger than himself. Lin Li was more subtle in his suggestions. At times, he would deliberately make some mistakes in his general knowledge. Despite that, Andre benefited a lot from talking with him. Yet, he did not realize that this man who was much younger than him was that proficient in the art of forging. But it was these subtle suggestions that benefited Andre greatly. Regardless of how subtle the suggestions were, the fact that they were given by a forging master made them very comprehensive. Lin Li was like a man standing on the peak of a tall mountain, overseeing the entire situation happening below him. Andre, on the other hand, was like a confused and lost traveler at the foot of the mountains. Without any pointers, he would never have walked out of the forest. If the man at the top of the mountain was willing to reach out to him and show him a way, he would only need a few minutes to walk out of the maze-like forest. Sometimes, realms were just so simple. Andre was filled with awe when the two men reached the foot of the Fire Plume Ridge. He was too excited from the knowledge he gained from Lin Li. By talking to him, Andre learned more things than in the past 10 years. Now, he had the confidence that he could reach the master level if he put in enough effort. And all these achievements were thanks to this brother before him. Brother Felix, you are a true genius, Andre said as he looked Lin Li in the eye. Apart from his hesitation when he reminded him not to meddle in the Fire Plume Ridge mission, Lin Li knew that Andre never talked in a roundabout manner. If he were to praise Lin Li as such, he had to be really sincere about it. At that moment, Lin Li felt embarrassed. Brother Andre, you speak too highly of me. No, I'm not complimenting you. Andre shook his head, and continued gravely, "I've thought about your suggestions thoroughly. You are really a genius. Sometimes I wonder where you get this creativity from. Perhaps it's because I'm usually too free, so I use all my time to think about these meaningless things," Lin Li replied while touching his nose unnaturally. What else could he say? Tell Andre that it actually wasn't any genius thinking, but the conclusions he'd learned from much time spent on metalwork that got him from a beginner to a master blacksmith? My teacher had told me a long time ago about how some people are natural geniuses. They do not need to study intensively or put in any effort to achieve successes that seem unachievable to many. Now I'm convinced. Andre shook his head and pointed to a tent not far away. "Brother Felix, the camp of the Silver Hand is in front. I'll not accompany you there, as I still need to rush back to my teacher." "All right, goodbye." "Oh, yes," Andre returned not long after he left. He looked at Lin Li earnestly, and said, "Brother Felix, although this does not sound nice, I would like to tell you that the mission this time is extremely dangerous. Don't worry, I might not participate in it." This time, Lin Li was saying the truth. "That's good," said Andre as a smile finally appeared on his face. Then, he pointed to a tent in the distance. "I'm living there these 2 days. If Brother Felix has time, you can come over for a chat." "Oh, yes. My teacher is a real master of forging, he will be very happy if he sees you. If there's time, I'd definitely go over." Since the two camps were not very far from each other, Lin Li did not hesitate in his reply. While replying, Lin Li could not help but feel curious about Andre's teacher. Throughout the journey, Andre had mentioned his mentor a couple of times. From his expression of admiration, this mentor had to be someone maleficent, someone who was able to nurture a warrior of at least level 15 and knew people close to the master level. After parting with Andre, Lin Li slowly walked back to the Silver Hand. Time was really wasted when they were trapped in that horrible cave. When Lin Li returned to the camp, it was near midnight. Apart from the crackling campfire and the soft footsteps of the patrolling warriors, the surroundings were completely quiet. Not long after Lin Li entered the campsite, he saw a familiar figure walking towards him. "Mr. Felix, you are finally back," Aragon greeted him. As Aragon walked closer to him, Lin Li could clearly see that he was filled with fatigue as though he had not been sleeping for a few days. "Aragon, what happened to you? You don't look good." Aragon yawned as he replied, "Nah, I just feel sleepy." He would never tell Lin Li about how Serena sent him to his sentry duty since afternoon when the reason was to wait for those 2 men in front of him. "Oh, then you should go and sleep soon. It's not good to burn the midnight oil." Lin Li just wanted to return to his tent to rest quickly. Although he was able to take a quick nap on the coach for 2 hours after his encounter, in Black Hills Town Inn, what was the use of it? He became so exhausted from the maze-like cave earlier that day. Now that he was back, the only thing he hoped to do was naturally to sleep. Mr. Felix, please hold on." Aragon caught up with Lin Li not long after he turned his back. "What's the matter?" "Mr. Felix, it's like that. Captain Serena wanted to ask how you want to punish the people from the Bloody Horns who had offended you. How to deal with them." Lin Li glanced at Aragon suspiciously. "Didn't you send them back to the Silver Hand? Furthermore, I don't intend to do anything to them. If you can't think of anything for them, you can return them to the Bloody Horns. It's nothing much anyway. We'll do as you say and return them to the Bloody Horns tomorrow," then, Aragon said as he nodded his head. Next, he asked Lin Li about his day again. "Mr. Felix, how was it on the Fire Plume Ridge today? Did you face any trouble? If you need, you can tell us anytime. The members of the Silver Hand are at your service." Apart from the useless map, there wasn't any problem. While replying, Lin Li could not help but feel uneasy at Aragon's sudden friendliness. The two people conversed randomly until Lin Li reached his tent. While walking with him, Lin Li was weirded out by Aragon's attitude. The friendliness Aragon showed him was overt, and underlying it was ingratiation. Yet, Lin Li could not find a reasonable excuse for that. Never would he have thought that he became the target of the Silver Hand just because his explosive mining technique at the Fire Plume Ridge. he could not help it, either. No matter how clever he was, he would not have expected that such a low-grade technique would cause the silver hand to feel such amazement. While he was standing outside the tent, he pointed to the few tents in the distance, and asked, "Aragon, do you know who lives there?" Aragon looked along the direction of his finger. That was the border of the 6 big mercenary corps. He could not help but feel suspicious towards the few tents scattered near the foot of the mountains. Aragon replied, "I'm not really sure, either. But it seems like the other mercenary corps." "I see," Lin Li nodded, and said no further. He wasn't hoping for an answer from Aragon. Just when Lin Li was about to enter the tent, Aragon suddenly exclaimed, "I know." "What?" "It's Isekaied, the tent of President Isekaied." Aragon said in a definite tone with an expression filled with awe and wonder. He was certain that it was not a wild guess. During the day, Captain Serena had mentioned that the Storm Sword Sage was here for the mission too. He was at least 80% sure that the president was residing in one of those tents. "Isekaied?" Lin Li asked in shock. "Are you sure?" "Yes." No wonder, Lin Li suddenly understood everything. That masculine fella he met in the cave was actually the disciple of the Storm Sword Sage. Lin Li stood outside the tent, and finally got curious about the Silver Hand mission. It was really a big deal for the Storm Sword Sage to come out personally. He was the president of the Adventurers Guild, and had a lot of duties at hand. What could possibly be the reason that had attracted him here? He remembered that Andre once said that that mission was really dangerous. Lin Li muttered in his heart after sending Aragon away. At first, he really did not expect Andre to be the disciple of Sword Sage of the Storm. Then, what he'd said on the road carried a different meaning. It was obvious that the mission this time was personally issued by the Sword Sage of the Storm. Other than Isekaied himself, Andre was perhaps the only one who knew the inside story the best. Even he had said that the mission was extremely dangerous, so, this task had to be really dangerous. "We must get another map tomorrow and make a clean break with this ghost of a mission as soon as possible." Lin Li wrapped himself in his sleeping bag. Before going to sleep, he gritted his teeth, and once again cursed the man who drew the map. He had been thoroughly exhausted the last 2 days. Lin Li slept until late in the morning. When he got out of the tent, the sun had already risen high in the sky. Lin Li squinted and looked at the sky. He was going to look for the deputy head in charge of logistics when, suddenly, he discovered a familiar figure in the distance. F***CK. Lin Li was startled by the figure. "Isn't that Matthias? What is this fellow doing in the fire plume ridge? Weird, how did Matthias become like that?" Lin Li took a few looks at Matthias, and then frowned in spite of himself. Matthias looked very different from the usual days. He was dressed in a gorgeous silver armor, with a luxurious sword hanging around his waist. His brown hair was carefully combed, and he looked very serious on the whole. He did not seem to be seeking adventure in a place like the Fire Plume Ridge, but looked like he was going to a grand banquet. Behind Matthias was a young mage, who looked less than 30 years of age, with black hair and ruby eyes. He had a handsome face, he wore a black long robe, and held a magic staff inlaid with a huge magical crystal that was shining dangerously in the sunlight. Yes, it was dangerous. The aura from this person made Lin Li feel as if he was being targeted by a venomous snake. Lin Li couldn't believe that there was such a young ace, besides those old monsters. This fellow was at least level 16. Maybe even Andre, whom he had just met the day before, was not necessarily the ruby-eyed mage's opponent. Lin Li merely took a glance at them, and then turned into the tent wisely. No kidding, he was not in a friendly relationship with Marathon family. Even an onlooker like Azalez knew that the Marathon family was planning to kill him. Now that they suddenly met in the Fire Plume Ridge, and that Matthias had brought along a level 16 archmage with him, if he was recognized by any chance, the trouble that would await him would not be ordinarily big. Fortunately, the two of them did not stay for long. After Matthias came out of the tent, he hurried away with the ruby-eyed mage. Lin Li watched the two men cross the camp and then go up the carriage. He finally let out a long sigh of relief. However, after sighing, Lin Li suddenly remembered that something was wrong. Matthias was a mage, why was he wearing an armor? And the one who had just passed seemed to be older than Matthias, there were wrinkles in the corners of his eyes. How could Matthias have wrinkles at the corners of his eyes when he was in his 20s? No, it's not Matthias. Looking at the distant carriage, Lin Li finally recalled what was wrong. This man was definitely not Matthias, his strength was much stronger than Matthias. When they came out of the tent, Lin Li could clearly sense that this person's strength was not weaker than that of the ruby-eyed mage next to him. The ruby-eyed mage was at least a level 16 archmage. With Matthias' magic level, he would not be able to catch up with the former in 10 years, not to mention not being any weaker than the ruby-eyed mage. Is this fellow Wilhelm? Lin Li thought for a moment, and denied the speculation. It doesn't seem quite right, either. Who was Wilhelm? That was the most beloved aristocrat of His Majesty the King, in charge of half of the arms trade in the Felon Kingdom. How could he come to the Fire Plume Ridge so casually with such a status? Lin Li pondered for half a day, but still couldn't figure out what was going on. He was about to pry into it from Serena when Aragon's voice came from outside the tent. Good morning, Mr. Felix. Are you awake? Good morning, Aragon. Lin Li came out from the tent and saw Aragon standing outside with a respectful expression on his face. Mr. Felix, do you have time now? Why, do you have something? Not me. Captain Serena is looking for you. She said that if you are free after you get up, go to the temporary command post to find her. She has something to talk to you about. Captain Serena is looking for me? Lin Li frowned. He couldn't really understand what was going on. The Silverhand situation was obvious even to the blind. Apart from the idlers such as Hank and Aragon, the others were up to their necks at work. As the captain of the Silver Hand, Serena had treated the temporary command post as her bedroom. Lin Li saw her come out of that place once in the past 2 days. What is she going to talk to me about when she's already this busy? Talk about saving her life? It doesn't seem like that. When can't we talk about it, and why pick the busiest time? Could it be to talk about the two fellows just now? Lin Li shivered in astonishment. Lin Li entered the big tent with a belly full of doubts. Serena was frowning in front of a map. He had to admit that Serena was beautiful at this time. Her fair hands were clasping her small face, and her beautiful brows were furrowed slightly. She looked focused yet calm, unlike the eccentric woman who'd climbed onto the roof of the inn making threatening gestures back in Black Hills town. Captain Serena, I heard from Aragon that you have something to talk about with me. Lin Li broke the silence while glancing at the map in front of Serena. However, Lin Li's attention was attracted by the map even just glancing at it. It was too detailed, like an exact reproduction of the real terrain. Even the ghostly cave was marked out with thin lines, giving the correct and accurate way to navigate the maze. Lin Li gnashed his teeth in anger the more he looked at it. He had to have a talk with the deputy head in charge of logistics sooner or later. He had hidden such a good thing and made him spend most of the day circling in the cave. Good morning, Mr. Felix. Serena looked up from the map and flashed a bright smile at Lin Li. To be honest, Serena looked really good when she smiled, her eyes resembled crescent moons. Unfortunately, most of Lin Li's thoughts were on that map now, and a small part of his thoughts was also concerned with the ruby-eyed mage and the fake Matthias on the carriage. How did he have the leisure to be concerned with how good-looking the captain was when she smiled? Captain Serena, is something the matter? Lin Li stared at the map on the table without even lifting his eyelids. Serena couldn't help but feel a bit of anger. What kind of mentality did this guy have? He had been staring at the map as soon as he entered the tent, and he was so brazen about it, not even putting the owner of the map in his eyes. She had prepared her speech for most of the day, and now, she couldn't even use it. Serena uttered a few words through clenched teeth. A small matter. Oh. Lin Li nodded, and continued staring at the map on the table as if he had just been talking to a fly buzzing in his ear instead of the beautiful captain of the Silver Hand. Serena completely collapsed. She had to change her strategy, and gave up on the idea of letting the fellow initiate the inquiry. Mr. Fellick, do you know the Marathon family? The Marathon family? As soon as the familiar name came out, Lin Li finally raised his head. Why, Mr. Fellick knows the Marathon family? Seeing that everything seemed to be back on the right track, Serena felt somewhat pleased with herself. Ha ha, Captain Serena, you flatter me. Lin Li smiled affectedly, but muttered inwardly, my relationship with the Marathon family is not only as simple as knowing. That's a coincidence, said Serena as she, intentionally or not, rolled up the map on the table and took out a picture from below. This morning, 2 people from the Marathon family came to me. They gave me such a picture so that I could help them find the person on it. Oh? Lin Li took the portrait and immediately froze. The black hair and black eyes, wasn't that himself? Why, Mr. Fellick knows the person on the portrait. Yes. Lin Li was grinding his teeth. Things had already come to this point, if he still hadn't made a sense out of it, he'd be having a brain for nothing. Azalez was right, once he was out of the shelter of the Alana Guild of Magic, the Marathons were bound to take action. But Lin Li really didn't think that the Marathon family would invest such a big capital, sending an archmage in order to deal with himself. Moreover, there were 6 carriages parked outside the camp. Those 6 carriages could carry over a dozen level 10 characters, and it would be a stinking nuisance to him already. It seemed that this trip to the Fire Plume Ridge was far from as easy as he imagined. And, Serena was also a trouble. She had been beating around the bush for the longest time, he was afraid her purpose was not just a casual chat. Serena wanted to beat around the bush, but Lin Li was not in the mood to do so. He did not go around in circles with her, and said straightforwardly, Captain Serena, if you have something to say, please say it. Haha, Mr. Fellick, I wonder, what do you think of the silver hand? Serena laughed brilliantly because she knew that she had grasped the key to the other party. Although she could not get more information after talking to the 2 men from the Marathon family, one thing was certain, the Marathons would never let this fellow named Fellick off. Perhaps not many people knew the power of the Marathon family better than Serena did. The Marathon family, which owned half of the arms business in Felon, could almost cover the sky with one hand in the kingdom. Even when His Majesty made a decision, he had to pay the utmost attention to the reaction of the Marathon family. The Marathon family, at present, was a monster of power and wealth. Other than the Alana Guild of Magic, which was a secular power above the world, who else dared to offend the Marathon family? A level 5 warrior, or a high-level miner? In fact, it did not matter what his identity was. Whether it was a level 5 warrior or a high-level miner, once the Marathon family decided to get rid of him, he'd be bound to fall into desperate straits. Maybe she was one of the few people who didn't have to be afraid of the Marathon family. Therefore, Serena was very confident in bringing this high-level miner into the silver hand. Serena thought her words were clear enough, she was only short of waving her handkerchief like a prostitute on the street, shouting, "Come in and have a rest, mister. Of the girls here, one is more beautiful than the other. They will surely serve you comfortably. The silver hand isn't bad," was what she got after a long wait. Ah? Serena's brilliant smile froze. Was this guy having a problem with his brain or his ears? Shouldn't he have cried and asked to join the Silver Hand Mercenary Corps, and ask her for asylum? How come isn't bad was all that came out. What did he mean by isn't bad? Mr. Fellick, Serena hesitated for a moment, but decided to speak clearer so that this fellow would not regret later, while Silver Hand would lose a rare talent. I heard Aragon said that you are a talent in mining. I wonder if you are interested in joining the Silver Hand? Join a mercenary corps? Lin Li deliberated for a moment, but still shook his head. Sorry, Captain Serena, I currently have no such plans. Mr. Fellick, you really don't want to think about it? By the way, the one who came this morning was God from the Marathon family. After saying that, Serena took another look at Lin Li. Her expression meant, now you know how bad it is? God, Wilhelm's nephew, was a well-known figure in Alana. At an early age, he had the ability to undertake tasks alone. He was also one of Wilhelm's most trusted aides. At least 1/3 of the business of marathon smithy was handled by God himself, and he had a frightening strength. At the age of 28, he possessed a strength of a level 16 warrior. Perhaps he'd be another legendary figure 10 years later. Oh, Lin Li nodded, but he wanted to ask Serena, what does God do? It couldn't be helped, Lin Li only came to Alana just over a month earlier. In this period, at least a whole month was spent in the Guild of Magic. If not for what Azelez had told him, he wouldn't even have known about Wilhelm and the Marathon family, let alone God. On the other side, Serena wanted to knock her head against the wall. She really wanted to split this guy's head and see what structure was inside. She had spoken till her mouth was dry, but he merely responded with an "oh." Did he dare give her a warmer response? At this time, it suddenly hit Serena that everything that had already returned to the right path seemed to have slipped out of her control once more. The fellow in front of her seemed to be really obstinate. He was in a constant state of calmness, no matter what she said. It was as if what she had said was not that the Marathon family wanted his life, but that an acquaintance wanted to invite him to dinner. Serena looked at Lin Li with a straight face. While Serena hesitated to make herself even clearer, Lin Li had already stood up. Captain Serena, if there's nothing else, I would like to go back first. Ah? Oh, yes, Captain Serena, can you give me that map? I can. Serena stared blankly at Lin Li, and then blankly watched him take the map away. When he disappeared out of the tent, Serena still couldn't make sense of the situation. Where did this fellow get his guts from? He's not even afraid of the Marathon family coming after his life. When Lin Li returned to his tent, he immediately spread out the map. Serena had guessed it wrong this time. How could Lin Li not be scared of 2 level 16 and above characters? But it was also because of fear that he could not join the Silver Hand. From what Serena said, Lin could hear that this beautiful captain shared some friendship with the Marathon family. However, the problem was that she didn't understand that the ill relationship between him and the Marathon family was not an ordinary one. It was bought with Matthias limbs. Who was Matthias? He was Wilhelm's son. Could friendship resolve such hatred? Now, the only way was to cut the Gordian knot. As long as he was fast enough to obtain the Black Lotus and then return to Alana before them, under the protection of Macklin and Aldwin, even if the Marathon family was bold enough, they wouldn't dare to be too hard on him. Besides, with the Black Lotus in the hands of a pharmaceutics guru, it was still uncertain who'd be the one bothering whom. He could just fight it out at worst, and look for the ingredients for the ephemeral divinity potion with a high reward. As long as he could concoct the potion, he could flatten a small Marathon family directly with an instantaneous legendary spell. They were looking for trouble? More like looking for death. Lin Li began to study the map in his hands. Lin Li was sending his respects to the deputy head in charge of logistics while he studied the map. That man was indeed cheap. He had given him a simplified version of the map. Lin Li didn't feel much about it initially, but compared with the one he had in his hand, it was a damn sight worse. Lin Li even suspected whether the fellow was deliberately fooling him. As a matter of fact, he had wronged the deputy head this time. At the beginning, the deputy head had indeed given a simplified map, which only provided the distribution of monsters at the foot of the mountain. Many places on the mountainside were not marked in detail. For example, the dam cave was only drawn with a line, and no detailed route was given. The problem was, Lin Li had asked for the map as a level 5 warrior. Who would have thought that he would go all the way to the mountainside? What kind of place was the mountainside of the Fire Plume Ridge? That was where magical beasts above level 10 emerged in endless stream. Even in the Silver Hand, no one would dare to go there alone, let alone a level 5 warrior. The deputy head thought that the captain's life savior had only wanted to take a stroll around the foot of the mountain. He didn't think much about it at that time, so he had chosen an ordinary map to give Lin Li. How could he know that the fellow's goal was the mountainside? This reckless fellow. Serena stared at the picture on the table, her eyes greening with anger. It was clearly something benefiting both sides, but this guy was quick to avoid it, just as if he was avoiding the plague. Was it so terrifying to join the Silver Hand? If it weren't for the fact that this guy had saved her life in Black Hills town, Serena wouldn't bother to meddle in these affairs. This was something of a big risk. With Serena's background, there was really no need to be afraid of the Marathon family. However, it was one thing not to be afraid, and another thing to be worthwhile or not. Although high-level miners were rare talents, offending the Marathon family for the sake of a high-level miner was not worth the cost. After all, the Silver Hand was only a mercenary corp, and there were many areas that they had to rely on the Marathon family. Not to mention other things, at least half of the members' equipment was bought from the Marathon smithy. Serena really wanted to throttle the fellow's neck and ask, "What's wrong with the Silver Hand? There's welfare, beauties, and you can even escape the Marathon family's persecution with us. How can you refuse so brazenly something that only benefits you and does no harm? It's best for the Marathons to kill this fellow." Serena nailed the portrait indignantly to a wooden board, and then threw flying daggers at it repeatedly. Dozens of flying daggers were stuck onto the wooden board. Only then did Serena shout vigorous out of the tent. "Aragon, come in. What's your order, Captain Serena?" Aragon hurried into the tent, and saw Captain Serena throwing flying daggers at the face of a certain distinguished guest. He felt his scalp tingle all of a sudden. "Go and help me get some men and make them release some false information." Serena hurled the last dagger. There was only a talk, and the dagger landed right between the eyebrows of the portrait. After tilting her head and admiring her results in satisfaction, she went on to say, "I don't care how this news is released. I don't mind whether you hire an assassin to kill or hire an arsonist to burn the inn. Anyhow, you must let people know that our two distinguished guests have returned to Black Hills town." Noted. Aragon withdrew from the tent in cold sweat. This fellow is really a trouble. After watching Aragon leave, Serena rubbed her eyebrows with a pounding head. This is the only way. The best way was to get that fellow to join the Silver Hand. In this way, she'd have a reason to shelter him from the Marathon family. Even if God came personally, she could answer him with a firm voice, saying, "He's a member of the Silver Hand. Why should I hand him over to the Marathon family?" This would put the Marathon family on the spot, but at least it wouldn't come to an open break in friendship between them. Unfortunately, that fellow refused to join them. It put Serena in an exceptionally passive position. However, it so happened that the fellow had saved her life in Black Hills town. Serena couldn't refuse to return such a big favor. At last, after deliberating it over and over again, she could only come up with this solution. As long as they could fool the Marathon family, she would use the Griffin to send this fellow away, far away from the Fire Plume Ridge. As for the future, he could only resign himself to fate. This was all she could do. The 6 carriages had just left the Bloody Horns camp. In the luxurious and spacious carriage, God, who resembled Matthias, was reposing his mind with closed eyes. The ruby-eyed mage was sitting next to him. There was a sarcastic smile on his face. The 6 major mercenary corps are getting bolder. They actually dare to shelter the mage named Felix. It's not surprising. People will naturally do things of interest. God's eyes were still closed, but he smiled with the same sarcasm. This morning, they had visited the 6 major mercenary corps one by one and inquired about the whereabouts of Felix, but the answers were surprisingly consistent. No one had ever seen or heard of him. Seeing the clues they had gotten from Black Hills town broke off, both of them did not look disappointed at all, but laughed, happier than usually. To them, this was good news. This meant that the search area would be reduced from the Fire Plume Ridge to the 6 mercenary corps. The reason was too simple. The Fire Plume Ridge had been completely controlled by the 6 mercenary corps these few days. Even if a mosquito flew by, the captains of the 6 mercenary corps would surely know of it, let alone 2 big living people? Unless that Felix could fly, how could all 6 mercenary corps be unaware of him? No one had seen him, no one had heard of him. There was only one explanation for it, that was, someone had to be harboring that Felix in the 6 mercenary corps. Master God, what should we do next? The ruby-eyed mage's eyes were filled with admiration as he looked at God. This was the most outstanding figure in the young generation of the Marathon family. Compared with him, his master, Matthias, was just a blockhead. Argus, don't ask me everything. God was still squinting slightly, but his smile was helpless. Don't forget, I only came out to relax. I'm not interested in helping third bro do such childish things. Master God, Sir Wilhelm. Shut up. At the mention of Wilhelm's name, God's face suddenly became stern, and even a little frightened. He abruptly straightened up and looked out of the carriage. Then, he lowered his voice and warned, "Do you want to die?" "Sorry, Master God. Never say that again. Don't even think about it. Do you understand?" God's face was still serious. After staring at the ruby-eyed mage for a long time, he sighed resignedly. "Forget it, I'll tell you what to do next. You have two things to do. The first thing is to send people to monitor the 6 mercenary corps and keep an eye on suspicious people. The second thing is to send a man to Black Hills town. If you get any information from there, you will immediately find the person who spread the news and find out who made him spread the news. If I am not mistaken, the person who's sheltering Felix would find ways to divert our attention. Things will be much easier if we find out who's trying to divert our attention." "Yes, I'll do it right away." The ruby-eyed mage got out of the carriage. At God's command, he divided the men he brought into several groups, and sent them to the 6 major mercenary camps and Black Hills town, respectively. God sat alone in the carriage, and seemed to feel warm in the palm of his hand. He raised his hand and saw that it was, because he had clenched his fist too tight, that his fingernails had cut through his palm, and a trace of blood was slowly oozing out along the wound. "Wilhelm, some things, you'll have to give me back sooner or later." Lin Li, who was buried in the map, was not at all aware that the Silver Hand and the Marathon family had made various arrangements aimed at him. Yesterday's lesson was too profound. He studied the map a few dozen times over and over again, such that he could remember it with his eyes closed. By about afternoon, the fellow started to become restless, and was itching for action. He called Sean, who was wandering around the camp, and they planned to go to Fire Plume Ridge again. But they were stopped before they could get out of the camp. "Brother Felix." Andre was driving a carriage, grinning and greeting Lin Li from afar. By right, carriages were forbidden in the camp, but this fellow was different. He was a disciple of the sword sage of the storm, and even Serena addressed him uncle. The 3 deputy heads were respectful to him. Who dared to say a word when he came in with the carriage? Lin Li understood at once when he saw the expressions on the deputy heads' faces. He did not say anything at the moment, and greeted Andre with a smile. "Brother Andre, why are you here?" "Teacher asked me to come out and do something. I happened to pass by here, so I came over to have a talk with you." "Come on, get on the carriage first. I have something I want to ask for your help with," Andre said as he enthusiastically invited the two to get on the car, which was so spacious that even when Sean, the humanoid magical beast, got in, it didn't seem to be crowded at all. After getting the two of them aboard, Andre drove out of the Silver Hand camp in his carriage. They drove along the foot of the mountain, through the flat wilderness, farther and farther towards a remote road. As the surroundings became desolate, Lin Li poked his head out of the carriage with a smile on his face, and asked, "Brother Andre, speak your mind. By the way, don't say you need my help, I don't believe that." Lin Li noticed as soon as they left the camp. Andre did not come to look for him on the way. Although he still laughed as usual all the way, the whip in his hand was getting heavier and heavier than before, such that there were blood marks on both horses. This only showed that Andre was very anxious. How could he be anxious when he was just dropping by on the way? Brother Felix is meticulous indeed, you could even see that. Andre laughed as he pulled the carriage to the side of the road and put the whip down. "Brother Felix, do you remember what I told you yesterday?" "You mean, don't get involved in this mission?" Lin Li frowned. He had guessed that Andre had looked for him most likely with regards to this matter, and he had guessed it right. However, why didn't Andre just say it and had to drive him out to such a desolate place? The reason for these doubts was not because Lin Li suspected Andre would put him in an unfavorable spot, but mainly because he felt that Andre's behavior today was somewhat abnormal. With his strength and status, there were not many things that could make him act so strange. That's right. Andre nodded, and pointed his whip at the top of the hill. An hour later, the 6 mercenary corps will go up the hill. They will face a legendary magical beast. Your big brother here doesn't want you to die, so I'm bringing you out first in case you follow the silver hand up to the hill. So exciting? Lin Li got a fright. From the beginning, he'd known that the mission of the 6 mercenary corps would be extremely dangerous, but he'd never thought it would be this dangerous. What was the concept of legendary magical beasts? They could be said to be at the top of the magical beast food chain. Each had lived for at least hundreds of thousands of years, and their IQ was even higher than that of the vast majority of humans. Their naturally strong body, coupled with the wisdom brought by the passage of time, was an incomparably perfect combination. Despite also being at the same legendary realm, the probability for a legendary human powerhouse to win against a legendary magical beast would never exceed 30%. No wonder. Lin Li understood at once. No wonder the tyrannical sword sage of the storm had to hire the 6 mercenary corps. However, as this question was resolved, more questions emerged one after another. What Lin Li did not understand most was that the strength of the 6 major mercenary corps was as good as cannon fodders in front of the legendary magical beast. Even if the sword sage had gathered them, how much of a role could they play? Was he really going to use them as cannon fodder? This was impossible. The sword sage was also the president of the Adventurers Guild. He'd be a toothless tiger after losing the 6 major mercenary corps. Not to mention other things, the Alana Guild of Magic alone could keep the Adventurers Guild from lifting its head. The bet that was due 6 months later would also become a piece of waste paper at once. Credibility, that was what a powerhouse had. But what could they do if they were not cannon fodder? Confront the legendary magical beast face to face? It seemed a little too fake. In addition, Lin Li was most curious about the identity of the legendary magical beast. What kind of legendary magical beast was it to attract such a figure like Sword Sage to take it down at all costs? At that moment, Lin Li suddenly heard a rush of trumpets. He had stayed with the silver hand, and knew that this was the order for the mercenary corps to assemble. And then, he saw the long row of tents in the distance, beginning to fold up one by one. From afar, they looked like a paddy field that had been blown by the wind. In the rush of trumpets, Lin Li seemed to hear countless footsteps sounding in the distant places, and a large group of adventurers were coming out of their tents, sprinting to the place where the horn sounded. This unprecedented task was about to begin. Brother Felix, I have to go. Take my advice, and stay here until the mission is over. Then you can return to the silver hand, Andre explained hastily, and planned to drive the carriage out of this place. To be honest, Andre's words touched Lin Li. This was another person who cared about him, besides Andoin and Jirian, albeit the way he showed his concern was a little eccentric. He had lured Lin Li out of the camp, with a lie without even asking for his opinion. Nevertheless, Lin Li could sense his good intentions. Wait, however, it was one thing to feel touched. If he did not ask about some things clearly, Lin Li feared he would not be able to sleep at night. Brother Andre, what on earth is this legendary magical beast you are talking about? I've never seen one before. Why don't you bring me along so that I could see it for myself? Anyway, you're strong, I won't be in any danger if I follow you. You want to follow? Andre's eyes were wide open. No, 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 how could you come along? Do you know, it's the salamander. Salamander? Lin Li's heart tightened, but his face was still. What's a salamander? The salamander is. It is. You won't understand even if I explained it. Anyhow, it's a very, very powerful magical beast. Brother Felix, listen to me. That's not the place where you join in the fun, and you don't have any special equipment to resist the heat emitted by the salamander. Maybe you'd burn to ashes by the heat before you even got to see it. So formidable? Lin Li muttered secretly in his heart, salamander. To think that there is really such a legendary level fire spirit in the Fire Plume Ridge. In a moment, innumerable ideas turned around in Lin Li's mind. He was thinking not only of the salamander, but also of the fire salamandered under the shelter of the salamander, and the cave in Sean's memory. According to Sean's recollection, it was a hot cave with a temperature high enough to bake a living person, and it was so empty, completely different from the complicated, cobweb-like cave that they went to the day before. In the deepest part of the cave, magma slowly flowed through. And those black lotuses grew right next to this magma. Lin Li now understood why several black lotuses could grow in a cave at the same time. It was all because of the legendary fire spirit, the salamander. The salamander was no stranger to Lin Li. He had encountered one back in the endless world. But, at that time, he was a super hunter with a mythical weapon. Where the arrows of the stars of fury pointed, even the most powerful monsters would be turned to ashes. But even a super hunter with the stars of fury had experienced a bitter battle when encountering the salamander. When Lin Li had finally succeeded in defeating the magical beast, he was too worn out to even walk. After that, he was reluctant to go deep into places like volcanoes for a long time. That was the shadow that the battle had left on him. However, while the battle had cast a shadow on him, it also left him two precious treasures. The first one was a pair of gloves, which directly raised Lin Li's combat effectiveness to a higher level. The second one did not come into play until today. That was the fatal weakness of the salamander. This weakness was too deadly. If used well, it was not impossible to create miracles even with Lin Li's current strength. But if he wanted to make a miracle, he'd have to go through Andre first. From Andre's firm expression, it looked like he wasn't going to let Lin Li come along today. Lin Li smiled. If Andre refused to let him come along, he'd just follow behind quietly later. He quit mentioning about joining in, and nodded his head obediently. All right, brother Andre. Go and do what you need to do. We'll hide here and wait for the event to finish before returning to the Silver Hand. How could Andre know what the fellow was plotting in his mind? As a matter of fact, not to mention Andre, perhaps no one could guess what Lin Li had in his thoughts. Who could imagine a barely level 5 warrior rushing excitedly in front of a legendary magical beast? There was a full 15 levels difference between them. It was even inadequate to use heaven and hell as comparison to describe such a difference in level. This could not be called seeking death. This was a complete and thorough madness. Even when Lin Li said he wanted to come along earlier on, Andre had only treated it as a joke. Everyone only had one life. Without any benefit, who would foolishly give it away? How would Andre know that not only was this fellow not joking, he was more serious than anyone else? Brother Felix, you can rest here. As for other things, I'll talk to Serena. Then, thank you, brother Andre. It's no big deal. Don't stand on ceremony with me. Huh. Andre got onto the carriage. He waved the whip in the air, and a crisp paw sound followed. The two horses neighed, pulling the carriage with Andre, and sped away. Sean, get ready. We should set off too. Lin Li studied the map again before leaving. Mr. Felix, are we going too? Of course, but Mr. Andre seemed to have mentioned some salamander. Sean was somewhat worried. He wasn't worried about his own safety, but about Mr. Felix, the one that changed his life. Rest assured, the salamander is nothing, Lin Li said brazenly. He slowly rolled up the map in his hand, and stuffed it into his backpack. Then, he took Sean across the flat wilderness, along the once-traveled mountain road, and quietly proceeded to the Fire Plume Ridge. With the 6 mercenary corps leading the way in front, the road was much calmer this time. Not to mention magical beasts, they did not even spot a mouse as they walked along the way. It was a smooth journey all the way up to the mountainside. If it weren't for the rugged mountain road, it would really make it a sightseeing tour. Wait, it was that withered forest before them again, but Lin Li stopped short outside it, for he discovered a pool of blood. The blood stretched out from the woods. It was warm and sticky to the touch, which meant it should be human blood. This puzzled Lin Li. He had just been to the woods yesterday, and he knew nothing better than what was in it. Apart from that abyss fiendish iron mineral vein, there were only trees that lingered on with their last breath of life. Where was the blood from? Surely there wasn't another magical beast that had appeared out of the blue. Sean, be careful not to make a noise. Lin Li unleashed 2 hastening spells, one for himself and one for Sean. In the meantime, he released a life detection spell, which nicely covered most of the woods. Under the coverage of the life detection spell, Lin Li tried his best to lighten his footsteps, and slowly went deep into the forest. There were no powerful magical beasts on the way, but the bodies of some adventurers and traces of fierce fighting were found by them. From the emblems on the bodies, it seemed that they were people from all the 6 major mercenary corps, including 2 members of the Silver Hand. The surroundings were in disorder. There were traces left behind by swords, as well as of bombardment by spells. A large area of trees was burned, even the bodies on the ground were mostly incomplete. From the wounds on them, some were led to their deaths after being torn by some ferocious magical beast, while others were obviously burned to death by fire. They looked like blocks of black coal from a distance. Firewolves. It's definitely the firewolves. This was probably the most dangerous thing in the Fire Plume Ridge, besides the salamander. Lin Li vividly remembered reading about it from an Archmage's adventure diary back in the Omniscient Tower. Firewolf, a level 10 magical beast, had sharp claws and the speed of wind. They traveled around in packs, forming a pool of brilliant red as if of sunrise. In the Archmage's adventure diary, this creature once killed nearly half of his companions in an instant. He did not jump in foolishly. Who could have his backpack accurately caught by a rock every time? It was better to count on money falling from the sky than to count on such luck. Thankfully, Lin Li was a mage. A hurried recitation of spells sounded, and 2 feather fall spells were released. One for himself and one for Sean. With the help of the feather fall spell, they fell into the cave like 2 feathers. When they were in midair, Lin Li freely released an illuminating spell. It was completely dark inside. Wouldn't they be in big trouble if the magma just happened to be under their feet when they fell? How fortunate. They were in good luck. As soon as Lin Li released the illuminating spell, he knew that the fall was most likely a safe one because the magma Sean mentioned was still a long way from where the 2 men landed. However, the scene in the cave surprised Lin Li slightly. Although he had heard about the cave dozens of times from Sean, Lin Li was still shocked when he saw it for himself. It was simply another world. The boiling lava flowed in the distance, and a thick smell of sulfur came with the heat wave. Under the blazing temperature, sparks burst in the air from time to time. Lin Li could even smell something charred when he landed. Under the illuminating spell, everything around was dark red, just like a world on fire. As Sean said, the cave was really spacious. At first glance, it was almost the size of 2 guilds of magic. The flowing lava was like a surging river. Walking in the cave would only give people the sense of majesty and magnificence, but it would not make anyone feel oppressed at all. I fell here last time too. Sean scratched his head, and pointed to a prominent rock in midair. Look, it's the rock that caught the backpack. Lin Li looked in the direction of Sean's finger, and felt a sudden wave of cold sweat. The lad's luck really surpassed the limits of humans. The rock he talked about was about a dozen meters away from the entrance of the cave. The tip of the rock was pointed and sharp. From a distance, it looked like a razor-sharp tusk. Falling from such a high place and coming across that rock was an oddity, not to mention that only the backpack was caught on it, and he hadn't had his back wounded by it. It'd be a pity not trying their luck on lottery tickets. Unfortunately, my backpack doesn't seem to be there anymore. I picked a lot of herbs and put them in it. Sean mentioned the matter with great enthusiasm. It didn't seem to occur to him that he had walked around the death's door back then. After reminiscing for a while, he suddenly remembered the business at hand. Oh, yes, Mr. Fellick, the herb you are looking for seems to be right ahead. Let me show you there. Sean was right. The black lotuses that Lin Li dreamed of were indeed not far ahead. In fact, even if Sean did not say so, Lin Li had already found them. For Lin Li, who was well versed in knowledge on herbs, there was no need to look for such a thing as the black lotus, because it was just like what a famous movie line described it. He was so bright and outstanding, his melancholic eyes and sad beard had betrayed him. Lin Li's long-cherished black lotus grew just by the flowing lava. From a distance, 4 black lotuses the size of a bull were blooming in a wreath of fire. An unparalleled powerful fire magical element was emanating from the 4 black lotuses. 4 black lotuses, Lin Li couldn't even control his limbs as he looked at the 4 black lotuses. This was what every pharmacist dreamed of. At least 90% of them could not obtain a petal even after exhausting their whole life. But, at present, 4 blooming black lotuses were placed in front of him. Calm down, this is too undignified. I've seen the world. Lin Li desperately sucked in his breath, trying to calm himself down. But he had just sucked in the hot air into his lungs when the fellow who told himself to calm down had already plunged himself forward. One of his hand passed through the burning flames, grabbing the root of the black lotus, and tugged at it hard. In an instant, the black lotuses, along with the soil, were pulled from the ground. Harvesting black lotus did not require any skills. The only thing worth noting was that it was best to prepare a place with enough fire magical element when harvesting it, otherwise, the black lotus would likely wither without the nourishment of fire magical elements. The black lotus petals that Sean got at the beginning lost a large part of their efficacy because there was no place where the fire magical element was strong enough. Otherwise, with Lin Li's strength as a pharmaceutics guru, he could definitely concoct something more powerful than the elixir of the sages even with a few black lotus petals. To be frank, Lin Li was still unable to create a man-made space full of fire magical element with his current ability. This was a propriety of a legendary mage. To some extent, this was tantamount to creating a magic field of one's own. In this field, the creator could even change the rules of magic operation, such as duration. However, it didn't matter. Without the magic field, there was still the Ring of Endless Storm. The Ring of Endless Storm was a true artifact. Although Lin Li still did not know what power it possessed, one thing was certain: in the space of the ring, time seemed to be stationary. Lin Li once tried to throw a pocket watch into the Ring of Endless Storm. After a month, he found that the hands were still in their original positions. That was probably the reason why a frog couldn't fit into the Ring of Endless Storm that possessed infinite space. Why? Because frogs were living things. Putting them into a space where time stopped flowing violated the basic rules of the world. Until the 4 black lotuses were put into the Ring of Endless Storm, Lin Li still couldn't believe that all this was true. From the time when he discovered the few petals of black lotus in Gerosis until he met Sean and learnt that the fire plume ridge was where he could pick the black lotus, and then tried every means to get the fire salamandered skin, all of this had taken up an uncountable amount of effort and attention from him. But Lin Li never felt there was anything wrong with it. On the contrary, he thought that all of this went without saying. The black lotus was such a precious herb that it should take so much effort and attention. He was even prepared to spend more of them on it after coming to the fire plume ridge. However, with the 6 mercenary corps coming to the peak of the fire plume ridge, everything seemed to become easier all of a sudden. With a simple jump and a simple stretch of the hand, the black lotuses were in the Ring of Endless Storm. It was simply like a dream. The feeling of having struck at thin air, too, made Lin Li confused and uneasy. "Let's go, we'll leave first." Lin Li planned to leave with Sean after putting the 4 black lotuses into the Ring of Endless Storm. The uneasiness hovered in his mind, constantly making him feel that something was not right. With this subconscious sense of crisis, he did not hesitate to believe in his intuition. "I'm sorry, Mr. Fellick, you can't go back." But, at this time, there was a sudden frivolous laughter behind him. The 6 mercenary corps were indeed strong. Even a terrifying magical beast like the fire wolf had failed to bring them much damage. There were no more than 10 corpses on the ground, and most of them were low-level adventurers. The fire wolves came in packs of hundreds, so it could be said to be a complete victory for the mercenary corps in eliminating them with such losses. But Lin Li dared not be negligent in the slightest. It wasn't a good thing that the fire wolves were hanging around the woods. This meant that the magical beasts on the fire plume ridge had been thoroughly enraged by the invaders, the 6 mercenary corps. He clearly remembered that there were no traces of life in the woods when he came yesterday afternoon, but today, a pack of firewolves suddenly appeared here. Since the firewolves could run freely, other magical beasts could also appear in areas where they should not appear. The expression on Lin Li's face was somewhat grave. He took off the crossbow from his back, and carefully loaded it with a vampire fong. Then, he quietly walked through the withered and yellow forest with Shan. They were lucky enough to cross the woods quickly. There were 2 roads ahead of them, one was a maze of the cave, and the other was the road that 6 mercenary corps had traveled. Lin Li chose to follow behind the 6 mercenary corps with no hesitation. With them opening the way ahead, it'd be much better than groping alone in the maze of cave. The 2 men quietly followed the 6 mercenary corps at a distance, neither too far nor too close, just enough to see the battle ahead through the warlock's eyes. But, as soon as the warlock's eyes was released, Lin Li was dumbstruck by the sight in the distance. It was only 3 hours since Andre drove away in his carriage. It never occurred to Lin Li that the battle would be so intense. It was like a meteorite had struck Earth. Thousands of members of the 6 mercenary corps had taken up positions on the mountain plateau. At this time, they were like meat grinders running at full speed, twisting all the magical beasts that came at them into meat sauce violently. The Silver Storm, the strongest fighting force among the mercenary corps, had been transferred. A large number of armored warriors stood at the front of the teams. They held thick iron shields, firmly guarding their comrades, behind them like a bastion of iron. On both sides of the Silver Storm were the berserkers of the Dragon Mercenary Corporation. They bared their tangled muscles to the waist, their axes danced like windmills. Many magical beasts did not even have time to pounce on them before they were chopped into meat paste by the whirlwind of hammers. Blood spattered on the berserkers' bare chests, drawing totems that were full of primitive savagery. A large number of mages was reciting spells. The surging magical waves, like the waves of the tide, constantly scoured the swarm of magical beasts coming from all directions. Lin Li did account from a distance. This group of mages were perhaps no less than 100. This was probably the strongest magical power that the adventurers had ever been able to gather. The 100 mages were at least above level 8, including at least 20 archmages. The staves in their hands gleamed with dazzling splendor. In the deafening roar, endless magical elements surged wildly, and in a split second a bloody storm was brewing. The peak of the fire plume ridge was like a pot of boiling water at this moment. Countless magical beasts poured in from all directions, each of them carried the scorching breath peculiar to the magical beasts of the fire plume ridge. Innumerable fire crows flew by, forming a large red cloud that blotted out the sun. Archers from the 6 mercenary corps drew their bows and fired their arrows constantly. A dense rain of arrows shot into the sky, instantly tearing a gap in the center of the red cloud. However, it was filled up by even more fire crows in an instant. The burning firewolves, like flowing blood, gushed from afar. The shrill howls of the firewolves sent a tingling sensation down everyone's spines. The magma that used to flow slowly became turbulent at the moment. In the midst of the stormy waves, numerous fire salamandrids rushed out of the magma. With a flick of their long tails, a rain of fire started pouring from the sky. Howls, screams, explosions, several sounds reverberated together, wreaking chaos on the peak of the fire plume ridge. However, all this had little to do with Lin Li. The 6 mercenary corps had completely angered the magical beasts on the fire plume ridge. This was even a good thing for him. Now was the best time to pick the Black Lotus. If he missed this opportunity, who knew how long he'd have to wait for the next one? Lin Li recalled the warlock's eyes after taking a hurried glance at the situation in the battle ahead. Then, he turned around and asked Shan, where is the entrance to the cave? It's not far ahead. Please follow me, I'll show you. Shan, clutching the huge sword in both hands, led Lin Li through a rocky wasteland, and then along a rugged path to a dark entrance. This is it, Mr. Fellick. It was here that I fell last time. Lin Li looked at the hole in front of him. It was pitch dark inside. When the 2 of them approached, they could clearly feel a wave of heat coming from within. Lin Li hesitated for a moment, and did not go straight down. Instead, he picked up a stone from the roadside and dropped it in. It took nearly 10 seconds to hear a plop from the hole. Fuck, Lin Li was stunned. There was some suspicion in his eyes when he looked back at Sean. Sean, you jumped in like that last time? Yes, Sean nodded like it was a natural thing. I was carrying a backpack, and when I fell, a rock caught the backpack while I was falling, so I didn't sustain any injuries. Lin Li broke out in a cold sweat as he listened. Fortunately, Lin Li turned around abruptly, and saw a figure in black robe floating over the cave like a ghost. His blood-red eyes were filled with devilish aura. They were so unique that Lin Li did not even need to look at his face. He knew that this person was one of the 2 men who'd scared him into hiding in his tent when they visited the Silver Hand camp that morning. Lin Li vaguely remembered Serena seemed to have said that this fellow was called Argus or something. It was said that he was a mysterious level 16 mage. The one with him was Wilhelm's nephew, a warrior who was also level 16. Who are you? Lin Li remained composed. While he asked something he knew the answer to, one of his hands quietly reached behind him and clutched the crossbow on his back. My name is Argus, one of Master Matthias' magic instructors. Argus's voice was calm, sounding as if he were talking about weather with his old friend. But as he spoke, a powerful magical wave continued to emanate from him, making Lin Li feel greatly pressured. It was indeed the strength of a level 16 archmage. Lin Li could clearly sense that purely in terms of strength, the fellow with ruby eyes might have already surpassed Jirian. Mr. Argus, is it? It's a pleasure to meet you. I didn't expect you were Matthias' magic instructor. That is great, Mr. Argus. Could you please tell Matthias something for me? Lin Li smiled casually as if he had really met an old friend. Oh? As a trace of doubt flashed through Argus' eyes, the strong aura that emanated from him fluctuated like ripples as well. This slight fluctuation was very short and subtle, but with a keen and incomparable mental strength, Lin Li seized the slight fluctuation in an instant. At the same time as the doubt flashed through Argus' eyes, a shrill noise of something breaking the air sounded in his ear. Swish! There was only a soft noise. A dark red light ripped the gloom of the cave in a moment. It went straight at Argus' chest like a venomous snake. Still, Argus was a level 16 archmage. The unexpected strike did not fluster him at all. Argus raised his staff almost at the moment when the dark red light cut through the gloom. A colorful halo flashed past him, and a frost shield and a flame shield had been propped up at the same time. Funny. Argus showed slight contempt on his face as he faced the dark red light as it tore through the air. What was a mere crossbow to an archmage above level 16? What was the point of attacking like this, besides provoking him? He didn't imagine Felix to be this stupid. How dare such a person challenge the Marathon family? It was ridiculous. But in the next moment, Argus could no longer laugh. The bolt tore the frost shield almost instantly without any hindrance, just like a burning knife cutting through butter. There was a tearing sound, and the solid frost shield was split open. The flame shield was exposed in the next instant. Argus's expression suddenly changed. He couldn't comprehend at all, why was this bolt so sharp? How could he possibly have thought that the bolt Lin Li had fired was actually one made from the fang of a high-level vampire? With just one blow, it had a great chance of penetrating even a legendary mage's magic field, let alone a small frost shield. When the frost shield was split open, Lin Li seemed to have seen the vampire fang tear open the thin layer of flame shield in the next moment, and then plunging deeply into Argus' body, sucking up the last power of the level 16 archmage. Clack! But then, Lin Li heard a soft crackle. Almost immediately after the vampire fang pierced through the flame shield, the magic staff on Argus' hand was raised at once. Then, a frost spear was formed in Argus's hands. At that instant, it impartially collided into the oncoming vampire fang. Fuck! Lin Li's face immediately darkened. The ruby-eyed mage's response far exceeded Lin Li's estimation. Under the circumstances earlier on, even Lin Li had to admit that he wouldn't be able to do it better than the ruby-eyed mage. As the vampire fawn pierced through the frost shield, what was left for the ruby-eyed mage was only a split second, but, in that split second, he had made the utmostly correct choice. The frost spear blocked what Lin Li thought would be the deciding strike. Master Matthias is right. You are very cunning, but, unfortunately, the vampire fawn dropped to the ground amidst the splashing ice debris. Argus smirked, and slowly lifted the magic staff in his hand. With a long and complicated recitation of spell, a bitter chill filled the air in an instant. Large snowflakes circled around the tip of the staff. The bitter chill even overwhelmed the natural heat in the cave. Shit. The look on Lin Li's face changed the moment that the chill diffused. With his present strength, he wouldn't be able to withstand the full blow of a level 16 archmage. Argus recited at an amazing speed. It was only in the blink of an eye that he had already finished his spell recitation. Endless chills poured in from the sky, and the magical elements were so immense that Lin Li could hardly breathe. At this point, Lin Li simply had no time to dwell on it. He could only rely on his instinctive response and channel a trace of mana into the torrent of elements ring. However, the expression on Lin Li's face suddenly froze. For he clearly saw that it was only a thin icicle after the endless wave of chill. It's over, the icicle was swallowed up by the torrent of elements in an instant, but what it brought to Lin Li was a feeling of almost despair. The massive magical elements and the long recitation of spell turned out to be all an illusion. The real purpose of it was to make him show the torrent of elements ring. This was a conspiracy through and through. As the last chill faded into the channel of elements, Argus' near-devilish, handsome face revealed a triumphant smile. It seems that Master Matthias is right, you have a good magic equipment, but, unfortunately, you've used it at the wrong time. Now that things had come to this point, it was no longer meaningful to play any more tricks. Lin Li took out his winter staff from the ring of endless storm as he scolded angrily, "Damn it, did Matthias ever tell you how he was beaten into a moron by me?" Argus smiled, and slowly descended from the air. It was absolutely unnecessary to use the levitation spell in a battle between two mages. Apart from the psychological advantage of a commanding position, overlooking the opponent on the ground, the magic at this archmage level had no significance at all. Unless you could fly faster than spells, the levitation spell would only make you a flying target. Neither of them spoke. They raised their staves and began to recite their spells almost concurrently. On one side, it was a roaring flame, on the other, it was a thunder of ice and snow. This was a pure power struggle. It was about who was more aggressive and ruthless. The collision of the flaming storm and ice storm instantly sent off sparks in the cave. Innumerous sparks of fire exploded on the elemental shield. Almost every spell made Lin Li shudder in fear. The power of a level 16 archmage was far beyond his limits. Every clash of the spells would dim the elemental shield right away. In the meantime, there was not even a sign of weakening on the other party's flame shield. As their exchange continued, the gap between an archmage and a magic shooter was magnified infinitely. This was a completely one-sided battle. From the beginning, Lin Li had fallen into an absolute disadvantage. This fellow named Argus was probably the most powerful enemy Lin Li had ever encountered. Even the Lich in the Shadowglen was not as terrifying as this ruby-eyed mage. Argus had attained a frightening level, whether in terms of skill or strength. In Anduin's words, this was a real mage, with incomparable rich combat experience that enabled him to deal with any situation with unparalleled accuracy and ease of judgment, which also gave Lin Li a severe headache. On several occasions, Lin Li tried to deceive the other party for a mana retroaction. However, what he got in exchange for feigning casting a spell was not an opportunity to reverse the situation, but merciless ridicule from the other side. Lin Li could even feel that the other party was not even giving his best. It felt like a game of cat and mouse. After the cat caught the mouse, it was not in a hurry to devour it, but instead played the poor mouse until the latter was hanging at its last breath. Only then did the cat snap the mouse's neck. Lin Li felt that he was the mouse at present. He wanted to figure out a way to be rid of the disadvantageous situation, but the battle was like a whirlpool, constantly dragging him to the depths. The powerlessness made Lin Li feel as if he was entangled by something. No matter how hard he tried, he could not prevent the battle from sliding down to the abyss step by step. The only thing Lin Li could do was to struggle desperately until the moment when he was exhausted of his last strength. The light on the elemental shield was getting dimmer and dimmer. Lin Li could already feel that the cooldown was gradually failing to keep up with the speed of the disappearance of the elemental shield. At this point in time, he had fallen into a terrible vicious circle. Perhaps for the next time, he would be facing the other party's spell bombardment without the presence of a shield. Are you still struggling? What admirable courage. There seemed to be a perpetual derision in Argus' smile. Just a few seconds ago, he had used a flaming storm to blow off the other party's elemental shield, and at the same time released 2 wind blades, which swiftly cut through the leather armor made of the fire salamandered skin. Without the protection of fire salamandered leather armor, the toxic heat in the cave immediately struck him like plague. The exposed skin was scorched almost instantly. Lin Li could even hear a sizzle. An excruciating pain assaulted him, and it felt as if he was being cut bit by bit with a knife. The high-intensity casting of spells had drained the last ray of strength from Lin Li. The severe pain was also a torture for him. When Argus's voice sounded, Lin Li was overcome by drowsiness as if he were stepping on a mass of cotton. He tried to open his eyes, but no matter how hard he tried, the sight in front of him was always a blur. Colors flickered before his eyes as if he were watching an absurd movie. Unfortunately, it's all over. Argus slowly lifted right hand, and a ball of light gradually gathered in the palm of his hand. The mouse was on the verge of collapse. It was time to bite its neck. Boom! A dull explosion followed. A dazzling glow gushed from the palm of his hand. The arcane missile struck Lin Li firmly on the chest. The heavy sound was like a hefty hammer falling down, causing Lin Li to spit out a mouthful of blood on the spot. However, the Lin Li at present seemed to drop silly. Blows after blows of arcane missile landed on his body, but he did not move at all. He stood there like a target, letting the arcane missiles hit him as the dull sounds rang out repeatedly. Pa! 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 There was no scream and no angry roar, only a stream of blood from his mouth. After the 10th arcane missile fell, Lin Li fell straight on the ground like a puppet. Everything in the cave suddenly quieted down. Even the slowly flowing lava seemed to be solidified by time. Sean looked at Lin Li, who was on the ground, and then at Argus, who was in the distance. His tanned face was filled with incredulity. He could not believe that Mr. Fellick, who had always been omnipotent, would be killed by this ruby-eyed mage. "Mr. Fellick, will you get up?" Sean's voice seemed to tremble. He bent down and tried to lift Lin Li up, but, when he touched him, all he could feel was the hot blood on his hands. "He can't get up." There was an indescribable contentment in Argus' voice. He had received 10 arcane missiles. No one can get up with that. "You killed Mr. Fellick." Sean stood up fiercely, his eyes turned crimson all of a sudden. The green, combat energy around him burned like a flame. He stomped his feet abruptly and flew into the air like a huge bird. The double-edged sword, which had been integrated with the abyss fiendish iron, was held high above his head as he slashed down with a heavy sound of breaking the air. Courting death, for a level 16 archmage, a level 10 warrior was no different from an ant. Argus raised his right hand without even looking at Sean, and another arcane missile was fired with a blast. Pom! The arcane missile landed solidly on Sean's body. But with the spattering of a dazzling light, the young man, who was as stout as a magical beast, did not fall from the sky like a broken kite as Argus had imagined. His green, combat energy was still burning, and his double-edged sword was still held high above his head. The shadow in the sky was getting closer and closer, and the look on Argus's face changed at last. In haste, he only had time to quickly prop up a frost shield. What followed was a crisp snap. How horrifying Sean's strength was, and his anger was in full swing. Even if it was a frost shield erected by a level 16 archmage, the ruby-eyed mage still uttered a groan of pain under the powerful and hefty sword. The great sword rubbed against the frost shield, sending a sparkle of dazzling fire there and then. Sean had torn a crack on the ice armor with a hardly sharp sword. The greatsword in his hands drew along the crack and slashed past Argus. In an instant, blood spattered from the latter's shoulders. Sprays of bright-colored blood spurt in the sparkling light. In that moment, it was gorgeous. Ah! The empty cave echoed with bouts of shrill screams. Argus's blood-red eyes were filled with unbounded hatred. Even the handsome and slightly devilish face was completely distorted almost instantly, turning extremely hideous in no time at all. Boom! 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 A succession of arcane missiles fired from the palm of his hand. Although Sean had the combat energy to protect himself so that they could not hurt his body, he was still forced to step back a dozen paces under the continuous impacts. He plunged his great sword into the ground, which barely anchored his retreating figure. Accompanied by heavy breathing, a pair of eyes, still carrying a fervent crimson tinge, stared fixedly at Argus. "You must die, bastard." Argus' voice was hoarse and shrill, like the sound of glass rubbing against each other. He raised the staff in his hand abruptly, and a yellow light engulfed Sean at once. It was followed by a hurried recitation, and massive magical elements began to distort violently. Under the effects of the delaying spell, each step Sean took required several times more effort than usual. Nonetheless, he held the sword tightly in both hands, and though his footsteps were slow, they seemed very firm. As Argus recited the spell, Sean fixed his crimson-red eyes on him while approaching him step by step in a slightly clumsy manner. Boom! All of a sudden, there was a loud explosion overhead. Then, they felt the earth shake as countless small stones fell from the top, stirring up the dust in the cave. This sudden loud noise seemed to be the prelude to a great change. Violent explosion, rumbling footsteps, and forlorn screams. The whole world seemed to be doused with a barrel of gasoline, igniting suddenly. The cave, which was originally hot enough to roast a living person, suddenly became immeasurably scorching. Both Argus and Sean felt their weapons heat up at the same time as if they had just been taken out of a blazing fire. And then, with a deafening growl, Argus was so startled that he forgot to recite the spell. Although he did not know what the monster was, he sensed a tremendous power from the roar straightaway, thanks to the keenness peculiar to an archmage. If Lin Li was there, he would most likely be able to recognize it as the roar of the salamander. Faced with this legendary power, even an archmage like Argus could not help the fear welling in his heart. The first thought that flashed through his mind was to flee. However, it was only a moment later that he suddenly realized he could not escape at all. With that deafening roar, the whole cave seemed to collapse. When large chunks of rock fell from the top of the cave and hit the ground, the dull noise seemed to reverberate in Argus' heart. There were only clouds of dust around him, and the sand that covered the sky blocked everyone's sight. Argus could only hide in blind corners, based on his memory. He had just taken a few steps forward when he heard something tear through the air behind him. He suddenly remembered there was a black bear with a greatsword trying to fight him with all his might. At this moment, Argus really wanted to die. If it were other times, even if the black bear flared up, he could never be Argus' opponent. He could just release a few spells that were above level 10 and easily shatter his combat energy. But now, the cave was like a pot of boiled porridge. Large chunks of rock fell straight down. If no attention was paid to them, one would end up with a split head. It was a scene of rivers and seas tumbling over each other all around. Not to mention reciting a spell in this situation, even if you stopped to catch a breath, you would risk losing your life. He could release a few instantaneous spells, but, against a level 10 warrior with combat energy, what was the use of instantaneous spells? There was no other way. Argus could only run with all his might. The earth trembled in the cave, rocks fell from time to time, and a furious black bear was chasing behind him. For a moment, Argus was unspeakably miserable. Argus couldn't figure what medicine the black bear had taken. For the sake of his companion, he could even give up his life. He was determined to kill Argus, despite the risk of being hit by the falling rocks. You're king crazy. Argus spat angrily, and tried to avoid the falling rocks. In the process, he had witnessed at least twice, the black bear was basically a madman. He would let the rocks hit him in order to lay his sword on Argus. *ck. Sick. In this seemingly heavenly disaster, escaping was harder than leaping to the sky. Besides, the fellow was still badgering him like a madman. Isn't he afraid of being crushed by the rocks or being burned by the lava? Argus glanced at the face full of insanity. He really wanted to drop dead. Boom. At that moment, another huge rock fell from overhead. Argus felt his scalp go numb as the rock fell. This huge rock was almost as big as a house. When it fell from a distance dozens of meters away from the ground, the dull sound it produced sounded like Mars had hit the earth. Even the thick walls of the cave were shaking. The position where the rock fell nearly made Argus cry. It was not far from the flowing lava. The road in front was blocked by the huge rock, and just behind was the blistering lava, so there was no way to retreat. And, in between stood a black bear with a greatsword. Oh, and a lucky corpse. Argus suddenly found himself envying that corpse. The body was actually unscathed in this calamity. It wasn't crushed by the rocks, nor burned by the spattering magma. It lay there quietly as if everything had nothing to do with him. Unfortunately, Sean did not give him the chance to envy. Just as Argus slowed down, the double-edged sword was once again held high above his head. I'm finished. Seeing that the sword was about to come down, Argus did not even have a place to retreat. Going forward was naturally needless to say, he'd be chopped into half by the double-edged sword right away. There was no difference retreating, either. He'd fall into the lava, which was probably worse than being split to death by the double-edged sword. Bomb. However, at this time, there was another muffled boom. Perhaps Argus was not destined to die yet. Just as Sean was about to slash down with his sword, a rock the size of a human head suddenly fell, hitting Sean right on his back. Although this did not hurt Sean, it actually knocked him down on the spot, and the double-edged sword fell to the ground with such a clang. How could Argus let slip this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? Without demur, he kicked the double-edged sword that threatened his life into the lava. I'll see how you're going to kill me now. Although in despair, Argus couldn't help but be proud of himself. He was almost driven mad by this black bear. Now that he finally gained the upper hand, how could he still hold back? Unfortunately. As he smiled triumphantly, he seemed to have forgotten another thing. Other than claws, the magical beast had a mouth full of sharp teeth. That was what Sean was doing at present. He did not even look at the double-edged sword that was kicked into the lava. There was only a growl from him as he pounced on Argus like a shot. *ck. As Sean's figure grew bigger and bigger in sight, the smile on Argus' face froze. He could only watch the black bear throw himself on him and send his thick paw on his face. Bomb. Sean was a real magical beast in human form. How could a mere mage withstand his punches? There was only a muffled thud, and flowers bloomed like kaleidoscope before Argus right on the spot. Countless little stars flickered in front of him as if he was hit by a hammer on his face. Help, Argus shouted in grief. But, as soon as he opened his mouth, his teeth fell out. Sean had a hard time seizing this opportunity. Who cared if Argus cried out for help? His crimson eyes were overflowing with hatred, and his fists came down incessantly on Argus' face, like he was hitting a sandbag. It took only a few punches, and Argus' face was all swollen. At a glance, there were only patches of purple and blue, with smears of blood amidst them. If one were to look particularly at this face, who would have thought that this fellow, who looked like he was in the dye business, was actually the handsome and devilish Argus? Argus had completely given up resistance. Under Sean's continuous rain of punches, he could only let out bouts of weak groans. A level 16 archmage being forced to this degree, this one thing alone would be enough for Sean to make a name for himself. However, Sean did not care about all this now. He was shrouded in the rage for revenge. There was only one thought left in his mind: he was going to kill the murderer who'd killed Mr. Fellick. Sean, take a break first, Perhaps even Argus himself did not expect that the body lying on the ground was the one who would keep him alive for the time being. Mr. Felek? Sean's fist froze in midair. He saw, with clarity, someone who should be dead sitting up from the ground in great spirit, speaking to him while spitting something out from his mouth. Argus, who was beaten to the pulp, was utterly stunned. The fellow who had received 10 of his arcane missiles actually sat up like someone who was completely fine. This Black Lotus is ** King Bitter. Lin Li spat out a few mouthfuls before he got up and patted Sean on the shoulder. Thanks, Sean. It's nothing, Sean scratched his head. There was a tinge of red on his tanned face. I am your attendant. It's my responsibility that I failed to protect you. You did great. Lin Li smiled. He turned around and took a look at Argus, who was beaten into a pig head. If not for you, how would our Mr. Argus be beaten into a pig head like this? Argus wanted to bang his head on the wall as he listened to this mocking remark. Unfortunately, he could not even knock himself to death currently. After a fat beating, he felt as if he had been run over by a huge stone. Every bone in his body was broken. Not to mention standing up against the wall, merely blinking his eyes would send a severe pain coming from the cracks in his bones. Moreover, his life was in the hands of these two men now. They didn't even need to lift a finger. They could just leave him in the cave and let him perish in it. How would he dare to offend the two of them in such a situation? Not only did he not dare to offend, he had to endure the severe pain and squeeze out a pleasant smile on his face. This fawning smile fell into Lin Li's eyes. How could he not know what Argus was thinking? He praised with joy, Mr. Argus is a smart man. Just when Argus thought the other party would let him off, he suddenly saw the latter take a bolt out from his pocket. Argus clearly remembered this bolt. When they had exchanged strikes earlier on, this fellow had used a bolt like this to pierce through the frost shield with ease, which almost took his life in a right there. If he hadn't released the frost spear, he would have died under this bolt. At the thought of the power of the bolt, Argus could not help but tremble with fear. He could not figure out what the man who had just feigned death wanted to do. Lin Li did not keep Argus in fear for long. He came up to Argus with the bolt in his hand. He even turned the latter over carefully, trying not to touch the wounds on his body. Hush, don't be scared. Let Uncle give you a shot. Argus gaped at the sharp bolt. He realized he couldn't even cry if he wanted. He couldn't imagine how a dignified level 16 archmage like him could end up so miserable. If he could, he would rather not have come to the Fire Plume Ridge by himself, nor send someone to keep watch on the Silverhand camp. Unfortunately, it was too late to say anything. Argus was a piece of meat on their chopping board at present. The only thing he could do was to look pitifully at the fellow resurrected from death, hoping that the latter could be gentler with his actions later. Lin Li held the vampire fang in his hand, and looked at Argus with ill-intentioned eyes, while offering a few hypocritical words of comfort. Relax, it won't hurt much. Such a look, like that of a wolf staring at a sheep, made Argus' hair stand on ends. Please believe me, it's just like a mosquito bite. Lin Li's smile was very light, but there was a violent shake of his wrist, followed by a spatter of blood. The sharp bolt was plunged deep into Argus' back. Ah! Argus released a feeble scream, but it lasted only for a moment, for the sound of the earth shaking covered it up again. The fellow who came back to life did not lie, it was really like a mosquito's bite. Argus did not feel any pain at all, but what it brought him was fear more unbearable than excruciating pain. When the bolt was plunged into his back, he could feel his back go numb as if he had just been bitten by a venomous snake. At the same time, the mana that he took pride in was rapidly leaking along with this numbness. The horrifying rate of loss was like the flood that had opened the floodgates, surging outward like a torrential tide. Argus lay prone on the ground, his wickedly handsome face turned pale with terror. For a mage, the mana was always the most precious thing. If he had lost the mana that he took pride in, what was the difference between him and a cripple? In face of such a tremendous fear, Argus suddenly gained a burst of energy. He began to struggle desperately, But, how was he going to compete against Sean in his current state? Almost as soon as he moved, he was stepped on his head by Sean's foot, and he jumped like a lizard, having its tail stepped on. Hot mud was stuffed into his mouth, scalding a few blisters in it. However, under the foot of the freak black bear, Argus could not even resist at all. He could only beat the ground desperately to protest against the shameless abuse of the two guys. "Be quiet, Mr. Argus. It's going to be over soon." The mage on the vampire Fong was shimmering with a faint blue light. The complex lines on the mass energy ward reflected a glittering translucency under this faint blue light. Plumes of visible halo flowed slowly along the magic circuit. 3 magic nodes ran continually, transforming the mana from Argus' body into energy that could be absorbed by the mass energy ward. And this energy, through the mass energy ward, was constantly strengthening the divinity metal on the vampire Fong. Lin Li gently patted Argus on the head, but his eyes were fixed on the complex yet perceivable transformation process. This small bolt was of extraordinary significance to Lin Li, not only because of the use of the divinity metal, but also because it was the first piece of equipment he designed after he came to Anril. Even for Lin Li, this was a completely new attempt. He did not use any ready-made blueprints, nor imitate any known equipment. It was a completely independent design. Everything was only built on theoretical knowledge. Even Lin Li was not sure whether the bolt, made from a vampire Fong and divinity metal, would really be able to achieve the effect he desired. The answer came out very soon. Argus, who was lying on the ground, was getting weaker by the moment. Lin Li could clearly feel that Argus was losing his mana at an alarming speed. The level 16 archmage, who had just overwhelmed Lin Li with his strength and rendered him powerless, had fallen from the realm of an archmage. And, all this happened in the blink of an eye. Perhaps in less than a minute, the level 16 archmage would be sucked into a complete scrap. The Fong of a high-level vampire was no joke. "Mr. Fellick, what's wrong with him?" How? Sean was a level 10 warrior at present. He was far more sensitive to changes in strength than when he'd first come to Alana. Moreover, the current Argus was a completely different man compared to a while ago. Even if Sean was slow, he could also sense something from it. This question, it's very complicated. Lin Li scratched his head. For a moment, he really didn't know how to explain it to Sean. The process was truly too complicated. It looked simple, it was a mere plunge of the vampire Fong, and Argus became a scrapped man. However, the principle behind it could not be covered in 2 or 3 words. This was definitely impossible in the past. Although the fangs of high-level vampires were powerful, they were not powerful to such a sick extent. Otherwise, the vampire clan would be invincible long ago. Be it the dragon or the lich clan, they could just suck them dry in one go. Wouldn't they rebel against the heaven, then? The real reason, in fact, was still because of the fat beating Sean had delivered a while ago. A level 16 archmage was beaten into a pulp by a level 10 warrior. This was a plain humiliation. Even if Argus had a strong mind, he could not stand such a brutal mortification. At this moment, Argus was in his most vulnerable state, both physically and mentally. In particular, he had almost completely given up on the control of his mana. And at this point in time, Lin Li had plunged the bolt into his body. The power of the vampire Fong, coupled with the channeling of the mass energy ward, ultimately produced this amazing result. To be honest, Lin Li was hesitant at the beginning. After all, Argus was a level 16 archmage. In case this bolt failed to produce the desired effect, but instead gave him a chance to fight for a breathing space, it would be a big problem for Lin Li. At that time, Lin Li even thought of killing him off and being rid of this menace. But, after a short hesitation, Lin Li decided to take the risk. Lin Li was afraid of death, so the most intolerable thing for him was someone threatening him with his own life. In order to continue living, he could do many things that others could not do. Since the Marathon family could send the first Argus, then they could send the second, third or even to the nth Argus. Lin Li disliked sitting and waiting for death, nor did he like to simply be crushed to death, so he had to fight back. He had to grasp more chips in his hand, and Argus was undoubtedly the most powerful of these chips. Being able to hang around Wilhelm's nephew and at the same time act as Matthias' magic instructor, no matter from which aspect, it seemed like his position in the Marathon family would not be too low. At such a delicate time, to be able to gather as much information as possible was certainly what Lin Li needed the most now. Facing a giant like the Marathon family, the more he knew, the greater his hopes for survival would be. Hence, Lin Li chose to risk it. A living Argus was much more valuable than a dead Argus. The blue light flowing on the bolt made Lin Li heave a strong sigh of relief. This was very crucial for him. In the face of a powerless Argus, Lin Li had countless ways to deal with him. Even if he were a mute, Lin Li had the confidence that he could get Argus to tell him what he wanted to hear. A certain pharmaceutics guru was really good at doing this kind of thing. The blue light glowed brighter and brighter. As he watched the level 16 archmage being left with strength around that of level 10, he abruptly pulled out the bolt. "Sean, do you still remember the way?" "Yes." Sean nodded his head, looking very sure. "Very well, you take this fellow with you. Let's go out first." Lin Li took a bottle of recovery potion from his pocket. He grasped Argus' mouth and poured half of the bottle down. Then, he poured the remaining half on the wound on his back, and helped him stop the bleeding. "Okay." Sean nodded his head, and reached out to lift Argus up. The Argus at present was nothing like a level 16 archmage. His magic strength had fallen below level 10, and his body was bruised all over. Faced with these two guys, he had totally resigned himself to his fate. He was without even the slightest hint of resistance as Sean held him in his arms. He stared blankly at the ceiling with a deadened expression. Boom! However, just then, there was another loud blast outside the cave. And then, Lin Li seemed to see ripples circle in the gently flowing lava before them. At first, it looked like ripples caused by stones, but, as the ripples spread, the movements in the lava grew bigger and bigger. After that loud noise, the lava was even making gurgling sounds as it bubbled. Subsequently, the ground broke, and bits of lava splashed up, making sizzling sounds when it fell on the hot ground. Amid the earth-shaking scene akin to the end of the world, the lava began to simmer. F***ck, damn it. This spectacular scene fell into Lin Li's eyes, and immediately gave rise to an ominous feeling. If he remembered correctly, there was a type of creature called the devouring beast that liked to make its appearance in this way. "Run!" Lin Li yelled. He pulled Sean with him as he planned to leave this place. But as soon as he moved, he saw the splattering of a monstrous firelight. A lump of lava spurted out, blocking the way of the two men like a wall of fire. An extremely striking red shadow was in the midst of that lump of lava. "Quick, run!" Seeing the flash of red, Lin Li knew it was something ominous. He let out a delaying spell without further ado, hoping that the low-grade magic could slow down that menacing monster. "Freak!" Argus gasped under Sean's arm. At the instant when the red figure flashed past, he was so dazed that his face ashened. He could not understand why his luck was so bad. Why must the earthquake come at such a timing to cripple me? After much struggling, he barely held on to his dear life. Now, he had to meet an devouring beast. Oh God, that's a magical beast of at least level 15. Even in top form, he would never dare to provoke it. Now that he could not raise an arm, he was no different from a cripple. I'm doomed. I'm really doomed. Although he'd already fallen to the stage of being carried under someone's arm, Argus was extremely clear about the ability of both men. One was a level 13 magic shooter, while the other a warrior who had just achieved level 10. No matter how fierce they were no match for that devouring beast that was at least level 15. The gap was clear, no amount of aggressiveness could cover up for their differences. Argus felt that he had been wrongfully treated. Lin Li felt even more so. Why did that devouring beast appear with such an untimely manner? The cave was already shaking due to the tremors. How could he deal with the monster when he did not even have the time to escape from the collapsing cave? After letting out the delaying spell, the two of them scurried away. Grr. The beast growled, shaking off the lava from its body, causing hot sparks to rain from the sky. Since Lin Li and Shan were wearing armors made from fire salamandered skin, they had enough protection. Unlike them, Argus had to suffer excruciating pain under Shan's arm. He was covered with wounds, and was wearing nothing protective. The sparks that landed on him were like searing iron. "Let me down, you damn sh*t. Quick. I don't want to die." Argus' shrieks were ear-piercing all throughout the journey. Yet, how would Lin Li care about him in such a critical situation? If he did not see value in Argus' life, he would tell Shan to dump him already. After shaking off the lava on its body, the ore-devouring beast's hideous head appeared. Lin Li stole a glance behind him, and became more certain about his suspicion. It was definite that there was an infernal magic iron mine below this stream of lava. On top of that, it was most likely a rich mine. Only ore-devouring beasts born on rich mines would have such an ominous metallic glow all over them. The beast was like a lizard in the chase. It was very agile due to its slender and long body. When it passed by, it was like a streak of red flittering light, covering big distances almost immediately. The delaying spell had no effect on it. What followed the faint yellow flash was leaping flames. Grr. There was a series of growls. Rocks that fell from the air were not a threat to it at all. Its slender body was like a fish in water, swimming at fast speed. Its two front legs' sharp claws were like steel knives slicing through tofu, transforming the falling rocks into powder instantaneously. Knowing that the ore-devouring beast was closing up on him, Lin Li did not dare to look back. He just grabbed onto his life, and continued to escape from it. His only chance to cast his spells was to escape from that cave. With the help of the hastening spell, the speed of both of them was already very fast. However, the ore-devouring beast was speedier than them. When they dashed into a narrow pathway, they were less than 10 meters apart from the beast. The road in front got more and more narrow, while the beast got closer and closer. Lin Li could feel the heat from the beast behind him and hear its heavy breath. Yet, Lin Li dared not look back. He knew his only chance to survive was in escaping the cave. The ore-devouring beast was so fast that it was able to pounce onto Lin Li before he could even pass through that narrow passageway. His armor was torn instantly, like a sheet of paper under its sharp claws. As Lin Li sensed pain on his back, he felt warm blood gushing out from it. Shit, Lin Li panicked amidst the agonizing pain. He had no chance to escape in such a narrow pathway. It was too late to distance himself from the ore-devouring beast. Pat. The thin and long tail of the beast landed harshly on Lin Li's back like a whip. To him, it felt a bomb. As he flew off due to the impact, a mouthful of fresh blood surged out before he crashed against the firm and hard crag. "Mr. Fellick, you go first." At the same time, Shan stopped in his tracks. He threw a rock at the beast with one hand while lugging Argus with the other. When the ore-devouring beast was about to pounce onto Lin Li, the fist-sized fragment smashed onto its head. Gore. It cried out in pain. Argus had never felt so helpless in any situation before. He could not understand why Shan was so foolish to lure the attention of the beast onto himself just to protect Fellick. Did he eat the wrong medicine? At this moment, Argus really hoped to scream, "Fuck you, that's a level 15 magical beast. If you want to die, can you not drag me along?" Yet, why would Shan have the time to be considerate about the feelings of such a passerby? His left hand was like a pair of metal pincers that clamped tightly onto Argus' neck. He did not even have the time to lift his head to scold him, not to mention that he would loosen his grasp. Shan was like a bastion of iron, an impregnable fortress in the middle of the road. The ore-devouring beast was a little injured by the rock. After shaking its giddy head, its small triangular eyes gave Shan a deadly stare. The hatred and anger within it were like a poisonous snake that was determined to attack. Argus could not help but feel goosebumps on his scalp just by looking at it. Under the blazing fire, it emitted extremely hot magical waves, an energy special to the fire attributed ore-devouring beasts. Especially for those that had their powers from the infernal mineral veins, their fire element magic was comparable to that of archmages of the same level. On its long and thin tail that was covered with scales, there was a tiny and flittering flame. It was like a small candlelight that could be extinguished at any time. However, it was not comforting to Lin Li at all. He knew that it spelled danger. The ore-devouring beast was going to rage. When that flame lit up, what waited for Sean would be a terrifying fire element magic. Sean, run! At this life-and-death juncture, the injuries on Lin Li did not matter to him anymore. It was as though he saw the massive flames breathed out by the ore-devouring beast turning Sean into ashes instantaneously. He had no choice but to get himself up despite the falling rocks. While struggling to control his mental strength, he unleashed his weakest mana retroaction ever. Boom! As soon as the mana retroaction was unleashed, another sound blasted from the top of the cave. As compared to the first 2 times, it was like the sound of heaven splitting with the earth. At that instant, it pushed the disaster to the climax. Huge boulders tumbled from the top of the cave noisily. Although Lin Li's 2 feet were on the ground, he felt that the earth was shaking as though he was standing on a ship. That did not exclude the beast that had its deadly stare fixed on Sean. It, too, was stunned by the disastrous situation. Its long and thin tail was still swiping left and right, while that small spark was still flickering. Yet, it did not breath out any fire at all. Amidst the continuous falling boulders, there were ear-piercing growls. It was like a bomb that exploded right beside human ears, which left Lin Li with nothing but the sound of buzzing in his ears. What followed was a moment of silence. Underlying the thunderous shriek was an authoritative command that silenced the entire world. The earth stopped shaking, the boulders stopped tumbling inside the cave, even the flame on the tail of the ore-devouring beast went out immediately. What they were replaced with was a ray of colorful light. The gorgeous beam drew a perfect curve across the narrow pathway to the 3 men and the beast. On the other end was a majestic palace surrounded by wildfire. The light was like a huge door which separated 2 worlds to each end. Lin Li was utterly flabbergasted by the multicolored light. He stood rooted to the ground like a puppet and stared blankly. To ascertain that he was not dreaming, he did something very cliché, which was to pinch his thigh. Arg! Lin Li drew a mouthful of cold breath due to the pain on his thigh. Are all these real? Lin Li suddenly felt so confused. Why did the earthquake stop out of a sudden? Is there a different world behind that blazing fire? Since I'm in a cave, it can't be a mirage, right? Grr. The ore-devouring beast finally lost its patience in the standstill. It dug the soil with its sharp claws, while the series of anxious growls continued. The hoarse voice drew Lin Li back to the present. The gorgeous sight actually caused him to forget the existence of the beast. Run! Lin Li shouted at Sean. Seeing that the ore-devouring beast was about to pounce on them, Lin Li had no time to care about anything else. He sped off like an arrow released from a bow towards the light. When the first beam of light shone onto him, Lin Li felt a tinge of warmness. It rose from his right ring finger and spread throughout his body. The warmness was completely different from the suffocating heat in the cave. Although hot, it was not uncomfortable. He felt as though he was hugging a small stove in his arms in the cold winter. What's the situation now? Stunned, Lin Li could not help but look back. Then, he suddenly realized that the ring finger on his right hand was emitting a blinding beam of red. Torrent of elements ring. The blinding red glow was as concentrated as fresh blood. Lin Li could even see that the red was spreading with amazing speed. At the same time, the ore-devouring beast behind him moved. When it pounced towards him, it was like a streak of red light. While Lin Li made his first move, it had already covered an unimaginable distance. Then, as it lifted its hideous head, a ball of fire appeared from its mouth. Shit! Lin Li exclaimed as he jumped up into the air. It was too late for him to bring out his elemental shield. He could only watch that ball of fire grow brighter in the paws of the beast. Boom! The gigantic fireball exploded. Lin Li felt as though every piece of his bone shattered when the bomb hit him. Damn it, I'm really doomed. Even fools knew the consequences of being hit by an archmage-level fireball under zero protection. Lin Li closed his eyes in resignation as the pain from his body soared. However, he forced his eyes open immediately again. No, I can't die now. Lin Li was not far away from Sean and Argus, who had fainted on the same lush green grass. The light ahead of him was still in a myriad of colors. Through that, Lin Li could see clearly the menacing or devouring beast leaping towards him at a freakish speed. Fuck. Lin Li raised his arms subconsciously over his face. Then, he saw that the beast was lifted by something when it passed through the color spectrum. What followed was an ear-splitting cry from it as it turned into a ball of ashes. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.